I'd like to call our meeting to order. This is the regular meeting of the Ojai Planning Commission for April 18th, 2018. Members of the public wishing to address the Planning Commission on items appearing on the agenda are requested to complete a speaker's card and file it with our secretary. Cards are available in the lobby. Speakers should state their name and address for the record, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes or less. Could we have roll call, please?
Chair Merck,
Here.
Vice Chair Quillisi,
Here.
Commissioners Jagiello,
Here.
Corbin,
Here.
Nolan,
Here.
Powers,
Here.
and one vacancy.
Thank you. Commissioner Powers, could you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Public communications is time set aside during the Planning Commission meeting for members of the public to address the Planning Commission on items of city business other than scheduled agenda items. Matters raised at this time may be briefly discussed by the Commission and will generally be referred to staff and/or placed on a subsequent agenda. Under state law, other than for emergency items, no action can be taken at this meeting. Chet, this is your big chance.
Sorry, Sherry, I'll fill out a card afterwards. Hey, don't want to become a regular, but after the last time I came here and listened at the last meeting, Commissioner Corbin had a great idea. Having gone through the process with the city, with Sherry, the city had some guidelines when you come in as an applicant to, say, add on to your house, to build a new house, whatever you're going to do. What would be super helpful to the public is if you came up with some sort of a list of things, even if it's cursory, you can't encompass everything, but of what you have to do for certain things, maybe pick a dozen things that people come with regularity for, and how much each thing cost to get you to the finish line, and approximately how long it's gonna take you to get there. Because in my case, we were literally plowing new ground. And so I had no idea how much it was going to cost, what I had to do, and how long it was going to take me to get there. So just as a suggestion, if you're going to work on something that would benefit the public coming to the city for help, and I think it would clarify a lot of questions for staff, is have some sort of a checklist. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Mr. Warwick?
I'm on 3.
All right. We'll move on to consent items. All matters listed on the consent calendar are to be considered routine by the governing bodies and will be enacted by one motion in the form listed. There will be no discussion of these items unless before the governing body votes on the motion to adopt. Specific items are removed from the consent calendar for separate motions. Item 1 on the consent calendar is the minutes of the regular meeting of the Planning Commission for March 21st, 2018. Do we have a motion to approve this? Yes, Commissioner Nolan.
I'll make a motion, but I just wanted to also make, I think it's an error, but, and it's nothing major. But if you go to page 3 of 5 under Commissioner Nolan, and you go right down about the middle where it has the modified water efficient landscape ordinance, it's going to become a part of the, I think it's supposed to be 2020 is the next building code instead of 2021. I could be wrong on that. Maybe we just need to check. But that was my only comment. And other than that, I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second it. In fact, we could have a motion to approve both unless there are
could.
corrections
Well, I could do
to the
that.
second.
All right.
All right, I'll make a motion to approve both set of minutes.
Items 1 and 2 at
Item 1 and 2, February
fell swoop.
21st and March 7th.
All right,
I'll second the
All right.
amended motion.
all right. We're going for a double header here, folks. Could we have a roll call, please?
We'll just do all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No. No?
Yes.
You're opposed?
Pardon me?
You're opposed?
Oh, no.
You're in favor?
Yeah, in favor.
Thank you.
I didn't know we could do that, Sherry. Thank you.
Learned that in the
The Brown
recent
Act
training.
thing, yes. Okay. Thank you. Disclosure of site visits and ex parte contacts. I don't think that really applies to tonight's.
No sites this time.
So we will move on to our discussion items. Item 3 is a discussion of potential water-wise development standards and options for development standards intended to promote water conservation. Could we hear from staff on this, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this meeting is a follow-up from the March 21 meeting. The staff report, it looks fairly similar, I think, other than noting that there was a March 21 meeting and that this was being continued to this evening to prioritize the recommendation and provide greater detail on the various areas that were listed for water-wise or potential water-wise improvements in the staff report. So I think that is the goal this evening, is to try to focus that discussion and get the recommendations on this item. That concludes staff's report.
Thank you. I imagine we'll have quite a bit of discussion on this, but I have one speaker's card here for Mr. Wyrick, and maybe you could put your 3 minutes in at this point. You could put your 3 minutes in at this point.
Okay,
and then-
all right. I'm not here as liaison. Brandy told me he was going to be here. I'm here as an individual speaking on this agenda item. And I want to put in a request, a bit of a plead for you, all right? This has already been to council twice, and we didn't act on it. We didn't act on it because there wasn't enough structure on it. You know, we need specific mechanics to act on. And when we got twice a long list of everything that we all would like to see, the response of the council was very clear. We need to see some evaluation. Which ones of these is low-hanging fruit? Which ones of these have, are wholly within our jurisdiction, can be done, clearly have a good net benefit to our citizens? Which ones are maybe a little more complicated, involve really only implementation on a regional basis, like, say, the net zero issue? In other words, please provide some structure in your recommendations to council that are specific. Don't just wait for us to say, what do we like and what we don't like. That hasn't gone over well amongst the council deliberations. Again, if you watch the tape and you listen to our comments, we're saying, what we need is specifics. What specific things are going to a good rate of return right now? What kinds of things can be implemented quickly and easily? Which things take more work? Let's unbundle this a little bit and make it something that we can take action on. So that, I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but I think that's what I'm looking for, and as an individual council person, and trying to relate what I heard my colleagues saying. Please don't send to us a long list of, oh, what do you like out of all of this? Well, we like it all. What we need is to help you. We need help governing here, guys. We need help with mechanics, in terms of taking action with specifics. So that's the comment I wanted to make, that I would hope that we could see in terms of deliverables out of this process. But I am happy to see something that's on the long list of things that haven't been done. There's a long list of things that council has asked that we cannot act on until Planning Commission acts on. And I think that list is up to 6 or 7. This is one. I'm glad to see we're working on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wyrick.
Yeah,
Commissioner
just
Quilisi, did you
a
have
question for the councilman, if we could. Do you think the council would be amenable to receiving partial deliveries?
Yes. Council would be thrilled to see partial delivery. Something we could act on easily and quickly. I mean, for example, if it looks like something it's very doable, possible, to have require some purple pipes in all new construction.
Great.
Right.
Okay?
Commissioner
But then, a net zero scheme that really only works on a regional-wide basis
Right.
shouldn't be necessarily bundled with something that could be done very specifically like
Great.
that. Does that make any sense?
Thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner
So
Nolan also
on
has
the,
a-
along the lines that Mr. Quilisi brought up, maybe what we could do within that deliverable package is, we do have this list, we could do immediate, mid-range, and long-term.
Absolutely.
Because there's things like, maybe like a climate action plan or a water conservation plan, that would take a while.
Yes.
But once again, low-hanging fruit.
Low-hanging
begin
fruit,
with,
to use
and
the
then
more
mid-range,
common vernacular, would be great.
right, and then turn over that list to
Right.
you more
Yeah.
immediately. Okay,
Yeah, and by my examples, I wasn't trying to express preference, just by example.
that was an example, sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay,
Thank you.
That-
Thank you, sir.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ware. All right, so this is a discussion item, and let's just jump right into it. Yeah, Mr. Powers.
I'm looking at the minutes from March 21st, and it dovetails with what what Councilman Wyrick was just saying. Because as I look on page 2 of 5 and 3 of 5, I'm seeing some very specific things, and what first came up was, okay, here are these, now what? There's very specific suggestions here, a lot, probably close to 24, they're almost specific, but not quite. And what comes up for me is, okay, whose purview is it to follow through on those or create something? For instance, several of us said we want the development of a strategic plan. Okay, well, that's really broad, right? Then I had mentioned something about City Hall serving as a specific demonstration of water-wise practices and retrofitting this building for gray water collection and landscape and whatever it might be to make it a model. So that's specific. And then Commissioner Nolan had a whole list of things. San Mateo as a template, the demonstration garden, revising existing parking lot requirements, no-cost permits like the city of Ventura. Like, we have this whole list from these minutes. And what seems that happens sometimes is we'll have a discussion on a particular meeting, and then we're at the next meeting with new agenda items or different agenda items, and what's on the previous minutes, it doesn't necessarily get looked at again. So what my suggestion is, we look at the minutes from March 21st and what's specific there, and what recommendations to that specificity can we make even tonight to forward to council.
Thank you. Perhaps we could use that as a starting point. Commissioner Quilisi, I see your light is on. Do you have something you'd like to?
Sure. At the last meeting, if you recall the minutes from March 4th, Commissioner Nolan and I each volunteered to take a couple of topics in the staff report. And I defer to the lady if she'd like to go first, or...
All right, well, is everyone okay with that? So
All right.
basically, I looked at landscape and gray water, and I do have this list here, which I could, you know what might be the easiest thing, rather than going through item by item, is maybe I take it back and score it, like low, medium, high,
Mhm.
and then I can bring it back, or do we want to do that
You-
tonight?
Can you do that right now while we're discussing?
Some of it might take a little more thought, but what I
Okay.
did
At least point out the short-term ones, and
Yeah.
then we can attack the others.
So what I did do is I went and did a little more research, and I hate to do the paper, but I'll keep this to printing. I think, well, let me just gather my thoughts for a second here. And I'm kind of looking at the notes too that came in our package tonight. And I think one of the places that I could start is at the modified water efficient landscape ordinance. And the question was, do we want to make that restrictive? It's required already. So the couple things that I looked at is, I have a feeling, and I haven't got the notes yet because I did partake in some online statewide webinars. They were supposed to send kind of the notes from the last meeting, but they didn't. But an update is coming, and I think I announced last time that they plan to do it every 3 years. And then in 2020, I believe it is, they're going to actually include it in the Green Building Code. So I think the things that I saw in there are some modifications that we could make on a city level would be to minimize like gravel and DG mulch and increase bark mulch. I mean, these are like, I think they are low-hanging fruit. They're not going to cost anyone a lot of money. As a matter of fact, they're going to cost the applicant less money. But the reason I'm putting it on there is that it basically benefits the soil and the soil microbes, and now you've got greater water holding capacity, which is huge.
So bark mulch instead of DG,
Not instead of, but we'd have to look at making a restriction on, say, the percentage of coverage that you could do with, like, say, DG or gravel, for example. In other words, they're a hard material, they don't break down and actually help add organic matter or feed the soil microbes, which is essentially the benefit of having a good soil sponge is because you've got greater water holding capacity and filtration with the soil. So that was one that I saw, and I did look at, do we want to eliminate lawns? I think if we did something there, I would say require the lawns to be moderate to low water use. That doesn't mean you can't. Basically let me just explain this real quick, how the modified water efficient landscape ordinance works. You take a square footage of the property that you're going to be doing the permitting on, or the project, and then you define the landscaped area, any area that's going to get planting and irrigation, or even an area that's just going to get mulch without any irrigation or plants. You put that number into a calculation. In addition, you put in the evapotranspiration rate, and what that is,
which varies by whatever's on top of the ground.
well, we have a number for Ojai, and it's a number, and it's water or rain in inches. And I'm not going to get into all the details, I can do it later. But basically, you take your square footage, and you put it in, and there's a state format, it's like an Excel file, and it'll spit out and say, your project can have this many gallons of water in a given year. And then the designer has to figure out, okay, I'm going to use certain types of irrigation, and I'm going to use certain types of plant material so that I don't exceed my water allotment. And you have to sign your design and show all the calculations right on it. Now, that's required by the state. So any new commercial or project or a new project that's 500 square feet or greater, or a remodel 2,500 square feet or greater, has to do that. So anyway, I feel like, it works pretty well, but if I had to say to restrict something, or maybe even put on a moratorium level, it would be maybe to cut out high water use plant material. And we could do it on a moratorium basis. We'd have to think about that, unless we want to do it long term. But those were kind of the two things that I saw. And then the other one is, do you want to eliminate swimming pools and spas, or make sure they're covered? I'm not sure if that's in our code or not, we'd have to look. But that's another place for water loss within that state ordinance that we already have to abide by.
Okay, the state ordinance, though, back to the first point you were making, that applies to landscaping projects of greater than 2,500 square feet?
500 if it's a new project, 2,500 if it's a remodel project that has like an existing landscape, but it's going to be refurbished, so to speak.
And the area is the area that's to be refurbished, for
Right,
example.
and that's only for permitted projects. And that's the interesting thing about all that we're doing. I mean, how many projects have come in this year? So the question is, do you put it in the ordinance, or do you incentivize these things, or how do you do it? But I'm just throwing that out there. So those were the things that I came up with. And to me, that would be a low-hanging fruit. I'll put an L on that one. The other one that I had in my original notes was the curb cut program. The city of Ventura does this, and what it is, and maybe some of you have seen this, the city of Ojai presently is putting in curb extensions. Some of them are near the bike trail. There's a couple on Oak and Blanche area. And you can see in the curb there's a cut. They've cut out the concrete, and you're capturing stormwater.
The gutter water goes
Exactly.
right into the planted area.
Right, and
Yes.
the purpose and the reason we're doing that is you're capturing the first flush, so you're getting pollutants. They're gonna go into the soil microbes, and the plants, depending on what plants we have in there, will actually help process those pollutants and clean the water, which is great. And then in addition, we're doing stormwater capture, and because it's planted, we're minimizing the amount of irrigation that we need.
Now you're talking bioswales and that kind of thing?
Right,
Okay.
So low-impact development. But the reason I brought it up is, like, the city of Ventura has a program where homeowners can do it. So what they essentially would do, I think the first 20 permits they gave free, and now they charge. But maybe we wouldn't want to charge, where a homeowner can come in, and not everyone in Ojai has a curb to do this, or even a medium to plant, but people do. And if they wanted to, they could pull the permit, they could go in, if they have turf in there, they could take it out, or if they have hardscape. But basically, they'd be creating a bioswale. And now there's more stormwater capture, which I know sounds like, you know, it's a little, but everything, all my research, and I've done a certification with LID and what have you, but capturing that stormwater is huge. And if you can capture that first inch of rain, I mean, sometimes our rain isn't that big, but as much as you can catch and keep it within our watershed and not send it down the street into the storm drain down to the ocean, you're actually I mean, I don't need to get into all the benefits, but I can if you want me to. But it's a good thing.
Keep the water in the basin, I think, is the
Exactly.
mantra.
So that's another program. I don't know if that would be considered a medium, because you would have to create a process to pull a permit and what have you. So maybe that would be like a medium type.
Could I just ask a quick question on that? So would this be something you see, like an individual homeowner would have the ability to come in and talk to the city about doing it, say, in the public right-of-way in front of their house?
Exactly, in front of their house.
Okay,
Yeah.
because
I'm sorry if I
obviously
didn't say that.
on site, they could already do it on their property.
You can do it on
if
your,
they wanted
on your
to.
property, and it's highly encouraged, and it's essentially required with the modified water efficient landscape ordinance. They say to do a watershed approach and to do all these things, and of course, keep your water on site. So this would be addition. It's where a residential project could do it, but it's in the public right-of-way. And in Ojai, I believe almost most of the public right-of-ways, maybe not all, the homeowners are required to take care of their tree, or if they have plants there, they're required to take care of it. So essentially, they would be doing the same thing, but they would just be now capturing stormwater. Maybe they're adding a street tree where there wasn't one. So there's that. Hold on, let's see here. Okay, now for gray water, I'm gonna put gray water as low. Maybe that could be disputed.
Low is good, or low is
Well, low would be,
long-term?
low is something that we could do, or maybe that's not the right word I want. It's the how about low-hanging fruit?
Oh,
Yeah, low priority, or something that could happen quickly. And has, and not a lot of cost, and has been a high benefit, okay? I actually have two things that I wanted to share with that. One of them is I have a model, well, I don't have to get it out, I'm just gonna say it. I have a model draft ordinance for that, and so basically that would be plumbing for gray water for new construction. I'm sure there may be some exemption, but to do that, and then also for remodels that require plumbing. So in other words, you do the plumbing, you know, under the house or outside, however you need to do it. You don't necessarily have to hook up your gray water to the landscape, but with a series of ball valves, you have the option to turn it on or off. And I personally think, I mean, it's water you've paid for, it's water you've used, and now you can use it again in the landscape. Right now, the laundry to landscape option does not require a permit unless you actually go in and change some of the plumbing, you know, behind your washing machine. So anybody can do this now. I mean, it's legal in the state, in the county, what have you. Right now, the simple system, which is where you're using water possibly from your washing machine, sinks, and showers, of course not your black water, which is like your toilet, or they even say your kitchen water, a permit is required. It's called a simple system, but you can't hold it. In other words, the washing machine water and the simple system, you're not going to put it into a tank. It's going to go via pipe directly into your landscape. And there's some guidelines that you have to bury it and mulch it. I don't need to get into that. It's all available.
bioswale it?
Well, you could essentially, but basically you're covering it, and the microbes, the soil microbes basically break everything down. So I don't have to get into the details, but that does require a permit. And then there's also the standard one, which requires a permit, and that's where you're taking all the gray water and potentially, you know, even your roof runoff and what have you. You're putting it in a tank, you're filtering it, and you're pumping it, and that could go back into your irrigation system. The other two can't go through an irrigation system, they're gonna plug it up. And I might say that even in my trade journals, I'm just being inundated with, the companies are coming out with all this stuff for gray water, for irrigation, and articles and all kinds of stuff. So it's happening. It's not happening here yet, but it's happening. So to me, that's almost like a no-brainer, and it doesn't cost a lot to do it. So that's number one. So that's plumbing and new construction and remodels. The second thing I wanted to bring up is the County of Santa Barbara recently adopted, they're calling it like a shower system exemption standard. And what it is they've taken that simple system, that's that middle one that I just described, where you're not holding it or anything. And for most of Santa Barbara County, most of the water districts have bought into it. You are allowed now, if you meet, there's a little bit of design criteria, but if you do that, you can do it without a permit. I would encourage us to do that one. I think that's another low-hanging fruit item.
Do simple gray water systems without a permit.
Right, and we can go right to Santa Barbara, they've already done it. And I also want to say that, well, I'll get to that in a minute. But, so that's my thing on that. I did have composting toilets on there. I know I would put that on, you know, as a long range. But I do have a sample draft redraft of the plumbing code for that. Composting and urine diversion toilets. Also, Oregon has it. I have a feeling probably in less than 10 years, it's going to be in our Cal Green Title 24. But I think it's something worth looking at. And like I said, it's probably not the immediate one because I know there's a lot of controversy. But there's that. And I'm just going to quickly look at this real quick because I want to make sure.
So Kathleen, everything you're proposing is for new construction?
Yes, because those are the only things we can regulate unless the city decides to do some sort of, I guess like a mandate that everybody, you know, all property owners have to do such and such. Right? How else would we?
I don't think we'd want to do that.
I don't think we do either. And so right now, this is only like for people that are, you know, pulling permits for new construction or remodels, which doesn't really affect a lot of people.
Right, it doesn't.
So in
That's
a
my
way, it's
concern.
low-hanging
Yeah.
fruit, but then I'm gonna get into it. I think there's an education component too.
Right, good.
Another thing that we had talked about last time was, I think I got most of that. We had talked about maybe having a guideline or a checklist or like a threshold. So when somebody comes in with a project, and I know this isn't just water, it could be more than that. But for instance, we have like the Title 24 Cal Green. I've worked on a couple projects with that, you know, and it's an optional thing. I mean, some of it is mandated and mandatory, but then they have like a tier of other things that you could do. And I bring that up only as almost like an incentive if we did something like that for commercial and residential. I don't know if you get a discount on your permits or your process gets expedited, but it's a way to incentivize or encourage more green building, including water conservation and water measures.
And is there anybody aware of any rebate program with Casitas?
They do have some rebate things.
Because we should look into that for sure, because that's a good
Right.
way to encourage
Right.
existing people, homes to upgrade their a lot of the culprits are the plumbing fixtures. I mean, I'm big on recirculation, right? And because it's huge. You've turned your faucet on, and if you have to wait a minute or two in the kitchen to get hot water, and all that's just going down the drain, it's like a travesty in this day and age.
Right.
So, and for instance, there's on a side note, there's one item, it's called a chili pepper. It's not the one I recommend, but it's one of them. And it's a recirculation pump that people can put into their existing house. It's $250. There's rebates that you can get that other agencies have given of up to $200 to put one of these in.
Right.
And so, you know, there's, so an educational component along with a rebate program, I would think, would be something that would have a huge effect
Right.
on the water usage
Yeah.
in a particular home.
To do recirculation, you have to have
No, you
a
don't.
loop
you don't-
somewhere
you
in the
do not
house? What's
need-
recirculating?
Yeah, this is this is interesting technology. It recirculates within the same pipe. You have to look it up. You have to do some research because I can't sit here and explain the science to you, but it works. I have one in my home, and it works. I turned my faucet on in my
Right.
kitchen. Before, I was one of those people who had to wait a minute, and I just sat there and just, you know,
Yeah,
oh my
I think I
God,
might
where is
get
this water going? And then I put one of these units in, and I have instant hot water, and I did not have to put a loop. So, this is a very good alternative that very few people know about even. I don't know how many people know about it here, but it's been on the market for the last 10 years. It's called the Chili Pepper. That's one of them.
Chili pepper?
And, yeah,
That's the one you recommend?
It
well, I have
it
I have an
recirculates
expensive
within
one.
a single section of pipe,
It recirculates within the cold water line.
within the cold
Well,
water.
no, within the hot water line. It pulls the water in and out of the line itself, back to the pump.
Nice.
And then introduces, the hot water
Hmm.
into that one pipe. It's very interesting
So you
technology.
need
I
a
actually have,
separate recirculation pump for
the chili pepper
your-
is the pump.
For
It-
your kitchen sink,
no,
say,
it's-
and
there's
a
whole
separate one
house-
for a
there's
shower and a separate
whole
one.
house systems where you can, I have one that's built into my instant hot water heater, the tankless. So I have a more expensive unit, which are great. It's a combination tankless and recirculation. It's a Renai. And it's built into the system itself. And it's most of them are built on clocks and programs, so they don't have to recirculate only during your high use time period. So when I wake up in the morning, I've got it programmed between 5 in the morning and 10 a.m. when I'm using it. And it just recircs during that period of time. So it's a combination of the two that are very, very successful in saving real water. I mean, those units are
Right.
great. So that's one of the items, and plus the toilets, you know, the fixtures are important. So what I would like to see is at least an educational form of products and of homeowners can use to pick up in the lobby or stuff, water-wise fixtures. You know, it's
Right.
just to have that, because how many people know about the chili pepper? How many people know that you could put a recirculating system in? I don't know. Very few people I talk to know. And yet this is
If you
simple
have
technology.
gathered the data, can you give it to the CDD?
Sure, I mean, it's.
And
it's-
let them
You can,
start to put something together for,
well,
for,
these are
you know.
probably put together somewhere. That's why I'm inquiring, because these are not new. And none of these fixtures are new,
Right.
but.
I was just going to mention, because I have it on here, and once again, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can just go to our neighbor, Santa Barbara County, SB Waterwise, and they not only have everything you can do in the building, including the toilets and
Right.
recirculating, all of that, but they have all the stuff in the landscape, they have low-impact development, and it's really good.
Right,
I'm sure we
exactly.
could call them and,
Take their stuff, you know?
Right, so they basically have, they also, I'll just quickly say, and I don't want to drag this out too long, they have stuff about funding, they have things about grants, incentives, they have a resource page, which is something we could even, this is a low-hanging fruit thing that we could do on our city website without taking a lot of time, is have a resource page, and even if we just had links
Right.
to that, there's one called SLO, SLO for San Luis Obispo Impact. I have a list of all these things. But if we just had the links and there was just a little verbiage so somebody knew what they were looking for, we could just have that.
Right.
And that wouldn't take a lot of time. And the reason I think that's good, it's not only for the people that are pulling permits, which is a very small percentage of the population, but we have all the people that live here
Right.
that are not gonna pull a permit, and they're all using water. And this is a way that they could be educated and grasp and find the information, including products.
Absolutely.
So, to me, that might be the low hanging fruit.
That is very low hanging fruit, and it's
Because
very.
we're really, you'd have a bigger impact, you know, a broader audience, so to speak. Anyway,
So how do we, so the question that I
so
have,
I think we just have to make our list up and maybe put like a rating on all these things,
or do
right?
you just take someone's information?
Well, so I said go to call,
mean-
we
I mean,
talk to
you know,
Santa
people
Barbara.
share information all the time, and so
Yeah.
if I mean, there's no
Absolutely.
copyright issue, so let's
I even
just-
have a
let's-
friend who's who works for Santa Barbara Water for the county, who's listed as one of the, you know, I mean, I could
Right.
call him and find out, or you can, you know, as a planner, I'm sure you can contact them and,
Yeah, I think
Ask
it's
them.
good to not try to reinvent. I'd like to
Well,
look
that's
at
what I'm
what they
saying.
have and see if
Yeah.
there's anything unique, though, about Ojai. And probably, I think one of the big incentives is also
yeah,
money works really well. So if there's rebate programs and they're more
Right.
tied to Ventura County or water
well, that's,
purveyors here,
absolutely.
I
That's
think
a-
we should reference that as
course.
well. I mean, I think even doing something as simple as having a search like
Right,
indoor, outdoor. So landscape standards, click
Yep.
on that, you get information. You want to upgrade your landscape,
Yep.
here's things you can do, here's rebates you can get.
Yep.
If there are fee or permit waivers you can get, so it's kind of list the incentives versus
Mhm.
your interior, your plumbing fixture things. I think those are just more specific, but like referencing that product, I wasn't aware of that. I mean, tankless water heaters, yeah, I'm
Right,
aware
but
of
how
that
many
as
people
well.
know that they have built-in
Mm-hmm.
recirculation systems that don't require a loop?
but
Not that
some,
many.
And especially if
Yeah.
you have a $200 rebate on something that's $250,
Exactly,
that
and I'm
might
looking
get
at a
somebody
website
interested.
right now where many water companies, not this one, offer $200 rebates if you put in a chili pepper,
Right.
and they're $250. So
right,
that's something you can,
Exactly.
convince people to do,
yeah,
and on a weekend, and they,
After you've
Yeah.
convinced Casitas Water District
that's the other-
to
that's the-
institute the rebate,
that's the
yes.
challenge. But even without a rebate, it's practical.
You
and
still
it
should
makes,
put it on
It
there.
makes sense
right.
for those, for at least a water-wise document, that if
Right.
the people that are interested, so I still believe it's gonna be educational.
I think
At
it's
at
our-
the very least, a recommendation to the public to
And-
do this.
Exactly.
If you're changing your water heater, think about, if you need a new water heater, think about a tankless unit
That has recirculation
and,
in it,
as an extra bonus with the recirculating.
without a loop. That's where most people
Yeah.
have a problem, because most of these older homes don't have that loop.
Don't want
And so-
to start
and-
repiping the whole
yeah,
house,
and they
yeah.
don't, they don't know that they can do it now, because the technology is out there.
Well, I think the awareness and education rebates, things like that are even better in a community, whereas you're saying you don't have a lot of new development. So a lot of these
Exactly.
things are normally tied
Right.
to new development. So you could write the most rigid standards in the world, but if you don't have development, it's not changing anything in the real
Exactly.
world.
That's why we said
Exactly, Lou.
So-
Education, I think,
That's
Yeah.
my point.
and these
We really gotta go
programs.
after the existing homes that are there, because
Right.
that's where the
Well,
water.
Well,
sa-
right-of-way
savings-
improvements,
Yeah.
existing homes,
Exactly.
trying to
Yeah.
get people who voluntarily want to do this,
Mhm.
giving them financial incentives and information, I think that would make a big difference in
I do
terms of
too.
water
As
usage.
some know, I'm in the middle of a remodel right now, and we have decided to put in the tankless water heaters. I had no idea that I could do it without a recirculating loop.
Mhm.
And so I'd like to understand more of that
Give me a call and
myself
I'll get you set up on
before,
a-
before I swap out the water heater for
Yeah.
the tankless,
Yeah.
which I haven't yet.
Mhm.
Now, they're more expensive, don't get me wrong. The ones that with recirculation in there are twice as expensive as the normal ones, because they have that technology
And
built
so
in.
what's the payoff period for that?
Well, that's, in this day and age with water, the payoff is just the fact that we're saving, any water we can save, there's a huge emotional and a payoff to that.
I used to worry about that cold water coming out of the faucet too, so I kept a
Yeah.
1-gallon bucket
Right,
right there and watered the plants with that cold water.
right. And you do that, but it always doesn't get done. I've noticed that
Yeah.
my bucket always didn't get pulled and
Right.
filled, so. Yeah.
I can wrap this up on the
Okay.
landscape gray water part. The other couple things, and these would probably be more long range, would be, I'm not saying we have to do this like a water stewardship plan or a climate action plan or sustainability plan, but something like that. And we kind of talked about it at our last meeting and how would that tie into our general plan. And I realize that's more long-term, but I wanted to bring it up again that we need something. I'm not sure, what exactly, or if it's going to be multiple things. But I think that would be a long-term. And then I think a short-term, low-hanging fruit would be to go back and look at our Title 12 landscape standards. And I had brought that up last time and several other times, of just to make sure that a couple times or the last time I looked, which isn't real recently, it didn't coincide with the modified water efficient landscape ordinance, and there were some things in there that were outdated that I think should be modified and updated. So there's that. I won't get into the fire things because I think we're going to be doing that later. That was like the fuel modification plan and all that stuff. So just to keep it easy for tonight. But I wanted to say, yeah, definitely that SantaBarbaraWaterwise.com, that educational thing I think is crucial. And to go for that, and of course incentives, rebates, or at least let people know where they're at, even if the city doesn't have it. You have the link for Casitas. Go to Casitas for your controller, your irrigation controller rebate, or what have you. But I wanted to say two things that are, I would say, action-oriented that I had planned to bring tonight and share as a start, but they're already in action. So I'm going to share them anyways. Number one is, I had mentioned earlier about the curb extensions and the bioswales and the rain gardens that the city is putting in as part of our Complete Streets projects. And once again, we get positive comments from people, but then we also get, what's that all about? You're wasting your time and your money. So a solution to that is, or that I came up with, would be to have educational signs similar to like a for sale sign, with a metal post that you could actually stick in the planter. And especially along the bike trail, where people are walking and riding, and, anyone could stop. You would have educational information. And basically it would, why are we doing this? What's it all about? It talks about the watershed approach, that oxygenated soil, plants, and the rainwater are the three components to green infrastructure or successful low-impact development. You need to have those three elements, because some people are going, why are you planting? You're going to have to irrigate a little. Well, they're only initially, but you do have to do that. But anyway, it would have a graphic, and then it would have some bullet points and information. I happened to be at the tree committee this morning, and I brought it up only because we have street trees in some of those planters, and there's some overlap. And Ojai Trees happens to be one of the members of the tree committee. So, and our public works director was there. We went through the whole thing, and they're going to fund it. So we're going to do it. So I need
Make signs, you mean?
right, but I'm also saying I got that part done, but I'm also asking for the approval of the planning commission. So for the final stamp of approval.
I don't think you need our approval.
I
You can just go ahead and do it.
just want to bring it up, or say it. So that's to me is a really good educational
We'll just
component.
criticize it after the fact.
Okay, you
when
can
we-
criticize it after that. Or if you have input beforehand, let me know, because we have to figure it all out. So there's that. And then one other thing I wanted to just quickly mention, and then I'm done. I attended the Chautauqua on Sunday. Very informational. A lot of it I already had and I knew. Some of it was like, ugh, okay. Some of it I was like, but I noticed when it was over, I kind of looked around at people, and, people were kind of like, well, now what's next? Or we don't know what's going to happen, or that's going to cost a lot of money. And, there were different comments that I heard. And what I had said to someone sitting next to me was, wouldn't it have been great to have like a call to action for the public? In other words, like Casitas is there, the different water companies, and they're kind of in charge, and they're doing this thing for, millions of dollars or whatever. What can the public do? And this gets back to this educational component. I said, what if there was something where anyone, whether you're a farmer, a rancher, you own have a residence, you're commercial, you're institutional, you're a school, you're a church, that the data could be input for whatever you're doing, like a slow it, sink it, spread it, Ojai Valley movement, and then data could be collected. So I've already mentioned it to the Green Coalition, and I think we're gonna go with it. And you're not gonna get rewarded. Well, you will. The reward is that you're part of the solution.
Right.
So it's a way to actually monitor, like, okay, what can we do collectively as, property owners? We're not the water company, we're not, another water company, even though we might be paying into it. But this is something. So I just wanted to share that as another educational component that is already in motion. All right, I'll be quiet now.
Thank you very much. Other comments?
Well, I covered a couple of these too, but I think before we quit tonight, we should have either a motion to specifically recommend certain things to city council, either that staff do or that things be added to the website, but they need to be specific.
I agree.
And it may take a little research and writing things down to present at the next meeting, but I think what we heard tonight was, this is what the city council wants from us, is specific recommendations. And so I volunteered to take on retrofitting and alternative management strategies. This is on page 4 of 6 and almost to the bottom of page 5 of 6, starting near the bottom of page 4 of 6 on retrofitting.
This is in item 3.
This is in item 3 in the staff report. It reprises the same material, the same topical outline that we had at the last meeting. And the first one is require retrofitting of plumbing fixtures upon sale of a house or commercial property to a certain date. I'm not sure what to a certain date means.
That's
But-
referencing the standards.
I'm sorry?
The standards for a certain date, like the
To
1984
a
standard.
certain date of standards, okay. I'm okay with the state law as it stands, saying you have to hit the at this point, the 1994 standard. But I think that in the guidelines that the gentleman mentioned during public communications, or just by incorporation into the municipal code, simply saying the 1994 standard, that's not something that the ordinary citizen walking up to the desk looking for a permit is going to understand. And so if the 1994 standard is 1.3 gallons per flush on a toilet, for example, or it's 1.2 or it's 1.5, I don't know what the number is. But that's what the state law is right now, and I would suggest that within the publicly available documentation at City Hall, that the state standards that we have to comply with be explained in terms that the citizens will understand when they come in for a permit. And yes, upgrading fixtures upon sale or transfer of use on a commercial property, or all of the usual conditions, I think are the right things to do here. Bring things up to the state standard at the moment. And I would recommend that we implement that, and I think it's going to take some work from the city attorney probably to say which paragraphs of the municipal code need to be done, but I'm willing to help personally if that is of any help to make sure that we get provisions in the publicly available literature that are going to mean something to the public, not just citing a state law. Okay, second bullet is require on-demand water heaters for commercial, industrial with recirculating features. And until our discussion this evening, my inclination was to recommend that yes, we do require it require on-demand but not require recirculating. And now I think we maybe need to do a little more study of the recirculating part to determine, you know, what the cost is and what the payback is, particularly for commercial buildings, because that all figures into a business plan, if you will.
See, on-demand is not efficient if that unit is far from the fixture. You'll have the same problem as if you have with a water heater. It takes, it'll
you
take
do
a minute before it
what you
gets to
save
you.
is you're not keeping a big tank full of water
You're
hot
saving
all the
gas,
time.
but you're not saving water.
You're not
The
saving
only way
water.
you
I
save
would agree.
water is with recirculation. It's
Yes.
the only way. Or gray water, that's great.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Those two items, side by side, have real impact.
And I would, all right.
Yeah.
I think requiring on-demand water heaters for commercial industrial is a good idea. For me personally, the jury's still out on the recirculating because I don't understand all of it right now. Either the costs or exactly what the benefits are. On the next point, encourage or require installation of tankless on-demand water heaters at point of use for new or remodeled residential buildings. It says reducing water lost to waiting for hot water.
Well, that,
But
see,
you're saying
but see, that
that
does, that's not
tankless
true. It's
doesn't
not
do
true.
that.
It doesn't. It's all a question, it saves on energy because it only goes
Saves on energy and
on
gas, right?
when you're using the unit. But if it's for, any heater, the distance it is away from the fixture you're using determines how hot that water is when it gets to
Sure.
the fixture.
Mhm.
So recirculation is the key here. The on-demand does nothing, but
On-demand is an
saves
energy
energy
savings.
savings, yes.
It's not a water savings.
not a water
Okay.
savings at
Well,
all, zero.
That's fine, and I'm in favor of saving energy. For me, the jury is still out on saving water, because I have my own workaround at home. But at any rate, that's what I would recommend, is that we do encourage, well, in fact, require installation for new or remodeled residential buildings, require the tankless. The next bullet is requiring sub-metering for multifamily or individual meters for second units. I think that should be the owner's choice. I've lived in apartments, not in the last few years, but in my condo down in Redondo Beach, the water was paid for. The water was part of our HOA dues, along with basic cable and a few other things. And so I'm not sure that requiring sub-metering is necessarily a good idea, because it's extra hassle.
I'm also not sure, just on a lot of the recent state laws on second units and things too, where they're pretty much encouraging you to be on 1 meter. And
Well,
if
they're
that may
certainly
have an
encouraging-
impact
Yeah, they're
as
certainly
well.
encouraging a single sanitary sewer hookup.
Right.
Um,
But even the metering, it's trying to operate, 2 distinct units, but from an infrastructure standpoint, it's essentially like 1 unit. So I don't know
Well,
if there could be a
it's a separate water
conflict.
lateral if you're gonna sub-meter it,
Right.
so.
I
Or
I
you're gonna
don't know for
play
sure, but that
arithmetic
could
games,
be an
yeah.
issue, trying to
Yeah.
require that.
Well, I would say that sub-metering for multifamily or second units should be an owner's choice. That's my recommendation for the commission to consider. Requiring new or modified residential or commercial developments to install the highest efficiency toilets and other plumbing fixtures available above the state minimum standards. I would recommend that we not do that. I think the state standards are going to progress with sufficient speed that we're all going to have to upgrade as we go. But I'm not in favor of going beyond the state standards at this point. For new or modified commercial projects, changing the land use or building new or expanded commercial structures require an analysis of the anticipated additional demand for water and further require water-intensive land uses to install measures reducing the additional water demand to a specific percentage below the original estimate, which sounds like liar's poker to me. you estimate 1 million gallons a year, and then you do an analysis and you say, only I need 200,000, so look, I've saved 800,000. I don't see the point of that. So I would recommend not doing that. And then the last bullet on that is require proposed new or changed land usage and new or expanded commercial projects that are expected to be water intensive to adopt best available practices for that industry to reduce water demand. I think that's a no-brainer. We should be doing that. For me, that's an absolute yes. Then on to alternative management strategies. The first bullet, making it easier to secure a permit for a residential gray water system with a stub out for watering. I guess this is on both remodel and new construction, but certainly on new construction. I would say yes, absolutely, make it easier to secure a permit. Even a no-cost permit, I think, is going to encourage a lot of this.
Right, and I have that draft too that I can hand over and share with the
Good.
city too.
Yeah, because I think we need to be giving Luke some very specific pieces of prose that we would like to see pass through city staff and onto the city council.
Right, I think
Yeah, the more specific you can be,
Yeah.
the more you can tell me how high a priority and how specific you can be,
Okay,
that makes the recommendation more clear to council.
Yeah, I'm gonna do that too with my list. I already started it, but I'll clean it up, do the prioritizing, and even if I have links to like those websites, and I'll put all that on there too.
yeah,
Okay.
and the recommendation to add a lot of that water-wise stuff to the city website, I think, is terrific. And if we can reproduce that one little piece on a sheet that is at the desk, I think that would be an excellent thing to do. Okay, permit composting toilets if applicable health and safety standards are met. I have spent a couple of days going through the municipal code and through the California state law, health and safety and public health, I can't remember which of the codes I've been through, but several of the codes at the state level and the municipal code. And nowhere does composting toilets appear. Both state and local law appears to be silent on that. However, I do have here an email from Jeff Palmer, who's the general manager of the sanitary district, from this morning, saying, yes, composting toilets are not allowed by environmental health or the Regional Water Quality Control Board. Gray water can be used by each property owner as long as it meets plumbing code and health code. For instance, you can't store it and use it later, which we heard already.
Unless you have a standard system.
Unless you have your own little processing plant in
And-
your yard.
Yeah, and I realize what you said, that it's not in the plumbing code for the state, and you're right, I'm not
Yeah. No,
challenging it.
the state code is simply silent on the matter.
Well, right, but, for instance, Oregon has it. I have a draft here that was put together by some people in California, and there are a couple counties that have been doing some pilot projects with it. So it's completely new, and that's why I said maybe this is a long-range thing, but it's something to look at. And I'm sure if we don't do it, at some point, it's probably gonna get into our building code.
And it's clear at this point, the state does not say you cannot do it.
Did we make any determination about incinerating toilets? Did
Oh, no, I
somebody
haven't looked that one up.
Well, I have the information, the draft that I have goes into different types. Yeah, some of them are, I think there's a misconception out there where people think, well, I don't, if you want to get into the details, but, like, hey, it's like an outhouse. It's not an outhouse. And I've heard people describe it, and people that are in positions where they should do a little more homework. But anyway, that aside. So they need to understand what it is. And they're like, some of them are like self-contained units, almost like in a little incinerator. It's almost like a mini sanitary district in a toilet.
Technology is
The
really
technology's
getting
there.
good.
So, and in other places, they are allowed, and I realize that it's not here, but they potentially can save a lot of water. Everybody, I just want to share one quick thing. I used to teach classes for a group, and we had a contract with the Metropolitan Water District, And, you know, we said, oh, they have 26 million customers. It's like southern Ventura County all the way into San Diego. And when I first started the classes, I wanted to say something, I go, maybe that's a little tacky. But I went to college, lived in San Luis Obispo in the early 70s, and there was a water shortage, and there was this, I'm going to say it, I know it's televised, but, you know, if it's mellow, or if it's yellow, it's mellow. You know, if it's brown, flush it down, right? So, I'm sorry, but I raised my kids that way, and they're still doing it. You know, it's essentially save a flush. But then Jerry Brown actually came out and said it after he declared the drought. And so when he said it, I felt like, okay, I'm okay, I'll share it with these people that I'm doing the classes with. But what I said was, and this is, of course, the Metropolitan Water District. It's not the Ojai Valley, not 26 million people. But I just said, let's just assume each toilet was only 1 gallon. If the 26 million people once a day did a save a flush, that's 26 million gallons of water. So when you start putting in perspective, and you know you're going to be using the toilet more than once a day, and you know there's etiquette and protocol and what have you, but it's a place where the water goes down the drain, you know, and it's our drinking water, so worth consideration. And once again, it's probably a long-term.
And again, I
future.
have not completely researched either environmental health or the Regional Water Quality Control Board rulings on this, so I don't know how strongly composting toilets are banned at the moment. I know state law is silent on the matter. It defines compost, it defines toilet, but it doesn't put the two words together and define it or say it's good, bad, or indifferent. So I think we need some more work on that one.
So on an issue like that, would it be fair to say that if the state or a regional agency were to say this is an adequate solution in the future, that you then might support it? It's just that right now there's not enough information to really reach a conclusion.
I don't personally have enough information to know how strong the prohibition is at this point. But if it in fact is strong, then my recommendation would be that the city simply monitor the situation.
I'll send a copy of the draft. I think it's in PDF format when I send my list over. And you'll have that.
I'd like to put my 2 cents in on composting toilets. May not be a popular opinion. However, there are lots of states that already allow for it. And the only reason I see they're not in play is because sanitary districts have lobbied because they'll lose money on hookup fees. Just like a lot of things. Who killed the electric car?
Yeah, they're a big factor around here.
Okay, I have just two remaining bullets on alternative management strategies. The third one says, as contemplated by the Ojai Valley Area Plan, Section 422, and the surrounding unincorporated areas, impose conditions on discretionary development projects, so on, so on. The City Council cannot impose. It can recommend to the Ventura County Planning Commission that certain things be done, and certainly requiring implementation of all feasible water conservation techniques feasible, making it potentially a toothless requirement, and develop standard conditions by land use type to implement this requirement. I think that's going to require some more work, but I think it's fine to recommend to the Ventura County Planning Commission that discretionary development projects outside the city limits in fact require implementation of all feasible water conservation techniques. I think that is something that we should recommend the city do, and I think it might just be implemented by a letter from the city manager or someone on the council, I don't know, the mayor, to the Ventura County Planning Commission to recommend that. Finally, prohibit certain water-intensive land uses as permitted by applicable law. I have not yet found applicable law that defines water-intensive land uses by that phrase. So I'm not sure where to go with that. But it says, for example, a water bottling facility and breweries. Well, we have breweries in town already, and I don't see the city council enacting an ordinance that puts them all out of business. But it, okay, once
that's what
again,
it's
you're
referring
saying, okay, there's a certain legal business that exists in the city,
Right.
and it's allowed to stay, but no new legal businesses of that type are allowed.
But it could be a moratorium based on present conditions, which means it could be lifted at,
Yeah,
At a
or,
certain
or it
point.
could stay forever, which becomes a prohibition.
right. I would personally lean more towards a moratorium, or, I'm not saying we should, but if we wanted to look at that further and we had to pick an option, I would lean towards a moratorium, not a ban. That's just my
I would
personal
lean
opinion.
toward the city encouraging commercial development that is low water use and discouraging commercial development that is high water use, but banning, even through a moratorium, the establishment of new otherwise legal businesses really bothers me.
I'd like to see it get back to the, where we were talking about in the previous
Yep.
issue, I think, about requiring new or changed land uses, new or expanded commercial projects to adopt best available practices and reduce water demand. If someone came in with a brewery, for instance, and they could demonstrate to us that they actually were not increasing the intensity of water use, I wouldn't have a problem.
Then that would not be a water-intensive land use.
Exactly. And
Right.
But it would be up to the applicant to sort of display to us, how they are saving water and how that's gonna.
That would be a fine idea.
Well, and we would then need to have specific criteria for them to follow prior to them doing, because, let's just say it, a brewery did come to us,
Yes.
and some of us spoke up about water use, and a lot of people didn't speak up about water use on this commission, and that concerned me. It was like, let them do what they want. They're a legal business.
But, they did also, they talked about net zero, and I know and same thing with their landscape. So they were looking at offsets, and they did indicate that they wanted to do that.
Yeah, but we don't have anything that requires.
We didn't have any, we didn't have
But we
anything that
also didn't
required it.
approve anything. That was the,
No,
you're
it
talking
was-
about the bowling alley? Yeah.
It
we
was just a
didn't-
review.
It was just a review. We didn't
No, I
approve
understand.
anything. Yeah.
I understand,
Right.
but for us to be able to offer some criteria and some specific direction, because I don't assume a designer
Yeah.
knows how to achieve net zero or how to recirculate or recycle the water they're using into their end product. I don't assume they know that. So if we can source them to help them get to the net zero, that would be really helpful.
I think publicizing websites or other sources of information on how to get to net zero would be a great thing to do. I agree.
One thing, if
Yeah.
I could just say one thing, especially on, while this doesn't define what all water-intensive uses would be, it's likely if you get a new land use like this, it's gonna be subject to discretionary review, and it's gonna be subject to CEQA. And one of your CEQA components is water use analysis. And that's getting to be a bigger area that's emphasized all the time. So whether you characterize something as water intensive, I could probably characterize any type of a hotel or something where you wash a lot of linen as water intensive. And you have a lot of hotels in this town too. So I would kind of look for an existing process like that, or maybe some type of a specific water analysis that would show how their specific use stacks up against a typical user like that, or what the anticipated water use actually is.
You're saying that, but there is a water analysis required by CEQA already.
Yes, unless it's an exempt project. If you're you're doing an EIR now.
Low-cost housing or something, you mean? What's exempt?
Generally minor projects, ministerial projects.
Oh, okay,
One
sure.
single-family home, but I'm saying it's likely, like you get a proposal to do a brewery or a large new use like that. We're gonna be looking at that for traffic, visual impacts, probably a range of
All
CEQA
those things
issues.
that are part of CEQA already.
And your water use is a required analysis. So you would be getting it through that for projects like this. I just realized again, Ojai doesn't get a lot of new development, but
We don't, yeah.
this is something where years ago you weren't getting, but for instance, a residential project, a subdivision comes in, you're gonna get a breakdown what the proposed water use is versus the baseline water use. So a lot of that would be covered. I suppose you could require a similar analysis even if you weren't doing an EIR for a project where you just wanted to say, what is the proposed water analysis for this use, if it's a brewery, for instance, and then sort of compare that to what would be a typical baseline for something like that. Is it operating more efficiently than normal or not? But
Well, if it's a greenfield kind of project, then the baseline is 0.
baseline is 0, right? Correct. But okay, for instance, year or two ago, I worked on a 130 unit residential subdivision in Monterey County. It had a lower water use because it was a golf course. And even though it looked like it was essentially an open space area, a golf course had much more use than 130 units going in. So your baseline was, while you were introducing people and you were going to have permanent residents there, the water use was actually dropping. So we had a pretty detailed water analysis on that. And that's the type, that came out through the EIR. It wasn't because we specifically said, we need to see how the water efficiency is going to be. It was because it was a change of land use and development. And in looking at that, water use in Monterey County, like here, was a critical issue.
So are you somewhat suggesting that through CEQA, we just need to adjust languaging that states that we want let's say, a comparable study on how a standard water use system for your particular business holds up to a water-wise system that we are not able to define at this time. You know, we can't, the criteria is the important part. We don't have a clear definition of that. All we know is we have or do we? That's my question.
I don't know that we do, and that's one of the things I'm saying is when I get like high water use land uses, I don't even know what that means. I can
Right.
think like some of these clearly are, but you know,
Your example
relative
of a
to
hotel
what?
is perfect.
Yeah,
you know?
like, okay, let's say you say commercial use. Well, a retail use might have very little water use
Right.
depending on what they sell. You compare that to a restaurant, you compare that to hospitality industry, especially a higher end one, the water use could go up pretty high at that
Yeah.
point. So that could in theory be classified as a high water user in a
Right.
commercial zone. So I would think if we wanted to get into like just saying high water use, you'd want to start, what exactly is that we mean?
I think we'd need a lot of help to define.
That's
that.
right.
I think you
Exactly.
would, because that, you probably have some things that would fall into that category now, depending on who's defining them.
Right.
Yeah, and I
Also-
think if the issue is to discourage or to maximize the use of efficient water use based on what you're doing, you're probably going to get a lot of that analysis through the CEQA process, is all I'm saying, is
But
well,
if we
and-
don't have a criteria to compare it to, we just have pure analysis. So we say, well, this is how much, this is how much usage they're having. But we don't really,
Is that good or bad?
yeah, is it good or bad? Right, like a hotel, do we know what the standards for all hotels are? So I guess what we're saying is that, what I'm saying is, when a project, a new construction is submitted, is there a standard criteria that could be part of the process, so we know what standard is, and that sets the criteria for doing some percentage above standard. I don't know how to even phrase it. See, that's how difficult it would be. But they would submit a standard water use through a CEQA analysis, correct? And then we would say, is that good or bad? How do we do that?
Right, I don't think you're gonna solve that tonight, though I know what
Yeah.
you're saying is that you would like to have something where whatever that water intensive use is, that you know it's operating better than a typical use of that
Exact- yeah.
kind.
Sure.
You could probably get that through your CEQA analysis by having a consultant could run that and say, a typical 100-room hotel with these features uses X amount of water. You're coming in 30% better than that. But I don't know that we have that at our disposal
and
right
then-
now.
Then we would have to take that data and apply it to our entire water system, availability of water that we have to be able to judge, what that actually means, right? I mean, otherwise, it's just a number. Oh, good, I'm glad you're washing less towels this week. That's good. Very good. We approve your project because you're washing less towels. But we don't really know that water usage, how it's depleting our existing, water supply, and how ultimately by approving that project, we are, putting ourselves as a community in a more precarious position with water. Because that's ultimately the discussion with moratoriums and things like that is what does it mean against what our availability is of our water supply?
That's why I think standards, going by standards and what has been or is currently happening is not the place to look. I think the place to look is a reinvention of looking at the science, not metrics and data, but the science of the technology that's currently available that uses the least water. And somehow creating some incentives or conditions on, you have to use these apparatus. And then we don't have to figure out how much of the water pool's being used. We're simply entering into the 21st century and using modern technology that's currently available for lowest use.
Well, yeah, I agree with that.
Like
but
your
we
water
still-
heater and
But we still don't
recirculator.
know, and that's true, but we still ultimately, there's that other side of the equation, which, we're just kind of hoping that that there's enough water for all of it. In the end, we don't ever know how do we judge, that an intensive water use project comes before us? How do we sit there and make a judgment that water use is over and above what we have the capacity to deliver? That's the issue right there, right at its crux. So how do we do that? I don't know how we do that. That's a bigger.
But I don't know if we're in this city, I don't know if we'll ever have a project that immense to
Well, that's what we're
warrant that
talking.
kind
That's
of
what we're
analysis.
talking about right now, though. Yeah.
Even a
So-
small thing like a brewery, though, is the same problem. It's like,
Well, no,
that they don't have the capacity to serve it right now, but it does
right, but
become-
let's take the brewer, because that was a conversation we had, so I'm not specifically picking on that, it's just a, real-time example we have, where the data shows on the low end, it's 4 liters of water used to 1 liter of end product in the research I did. And most breweries are 6 to 8 liters to water used to 1 liter of beer product. So we have that kind of metric there.
Right, yeah.
Simply, I mean, if the technology were put into place, like the brewery in San Diego that uses all recycled water for their beer, they're filtering all their water and making beer, and it tastes fine, and it's net zero. The technology's there. So how, it's how far a developer and a business owner wants to go to it, and those conditions are something we can set.
I think that's part of the question is, can we say to a business owner, you have to meet this criteria or something like that?
To me, I think Commissioner Quillisi said in these meeting notes, he spoke about, looking at the general plan and where are we and where do we want to go and where do we want to be in the future. And the general plan is going to address some of this. And looking at the general plan as our holy grail, that will determine whether we can put those conditions on or not. Because if we determine it's going to affect the future in a way that is harmful, then we got to do what we got to do now.
Commissioner Nolan?
We talked about this last time, and I had it on my list, and I think I might have mentioned it, but and it ties into what Commissioner Jagiello and Commissioner Powers were saying. We could propose, and this could be on our list to go to City Council, do we create a threshold where we include all these different water conservation devices, maybe, indoors and outdoors, or one or the other? And we say you have to meet, I'm just throwing this number out there, it could be whatever it is, 75% of those. And these are things that are maybe like in addition to what's normally required, or maybe it's, 15% or 10%. But it's put into place as a conservation measure, or a further measure, knowing our, the condition that we are in here with our water issue. I don't know what that number is, but I did put it down and thought about it also, like, I'm not, it's gonna take some thought and discussion and what have you, and I know we'd like to get things moving, but it's something to think about.
So,
Well-
I just have a question for Mr. Conley. So if someone has an EIR is required, could we start with the idea of we'd prefer a net zero project in terms of water use, and then say, how do they vary from that? You know what I mean?
The best way to do that is cities are in the best position to set their thresholds for what constitutes an impact. So if you had a policy that said net zero, you need to have something to measure against. So like we couldn't have an EIR under process and then we say, now we're going to invent the rules. You'd have to have that standard. That would be the threshold in that case, just like you do with traffic, whether it's a level of service or it's going to go to vehicle miles
Actually, we do
traveled
that
in the
with traffic.
future.
Yeah.
So then you would have on two levels under CEQA, you could have an impact directly exceeding a policy, and you have the policy impact essentially itself. It's in conflict with something that the city has in its general plan, which you can't approve projects that are contrary to your general plan. The only way you could do that is you'd have to have a statement of overriding considerations or something saying we recognize the impact, but we think the project has this benefit, jobs, whatever, so we're going to approve it anyway. But that would be a way, is coming up with a policy on water use, however it's framed, and we do need to do a general plan update. That would be a way to set a standard by which you're measuring water usage for projects. Now granted, depending on how you write it, it could just penalize projects that are high water users no matter what. They may not be able to meet a policy
Well,
like a
that's-
net zero unless there's some other way to pick up offsets elsewhere, where you essentially like getting into a sort of carbon discussion where high carbon producers are going to have to create offsets.
Yeah.
You could do something like that, but that would be the way you would get that threshold into the EIR.
With that, you would have had to give allocations to every parcel or every business owner or something in the city, so that those that are not using as much water as you've allocated, and how you decide what that number is beyond me, then they have some water allocation they could sell to someone else to achieve net zero. But I'm not sure how you come up with all of that. Or are you gonna get the whole neighborhood together, because all of these residential parcels are being really water-wise now, and they've got, low drought-resistant plants everywhere and no lawn. How much water allocation does that save me that I can sell to a business? I don't know how we come up with that.
That could be pretty interesting.
Yeah,
We'd have a whole black market in water.
Well,
black market and water allocation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, there's an interesting project right now over in Miners Oaks. It's a senior housing project that is actually net zero in terms of water, because what they're doing is going around to the school district and refitting all the toilets in the school district to save the amount of water that they expect to use in their project, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Which
A fraction of a gallon at a time.
and personally, I've never been for that approach. I know those offsets are allowed and people are doing them, but honestly, to me, it makes for a lazy approach for an overall community design.
What do you
There's also
prefer?
There's also the
I
problem-
prefer they're building something, use the latest tech. I prefer keep it simple.
And that's as good as we can do, and
Use
we'll
the
accept that.
Use the latest tech on that building. Figure out, buy bulk for the schools, get a great price, upgrade the school, just keep it simple. That's really, it's like, okay, so the schools are gonna have new fixtures, but then there's new residential, will still be using a bunch of water, but, so what? I still want that new residential place to be,
Yeah, well, I think they do. I think the new
know.
does. That's part of their net zero program, is that their fixtures are also upgraded, but that's not, and they're, in addition to that.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
they were starting with a
Yeah.
zero baseline, so you've got a bunch of catch-up to do
Right.
outside the parcel.
So I think a net zero is, I know Bill kind of poo-pooed it a little bit, but it, it kind of goes along with a moratorium kind of thing. It's better than a moratorium because it sets a very specific goal of water-wise policy, and that's the difference. And it also encourages people to really design something that, takes into consideration the use of water. And we can override that with special consideration if it comes before the planning commission. Like if it's a
Yeah.
really good brewery, a really good.
Well, I'm just thinking, for example, now that this, and you're talking about that place on El Roblar. Now that they have volunteered to upgrade all the schools' toilets, what's the next project gonna be able to do?
Upgrade everybody's
more likely
recirculation
nothing.
system, in all the residential neighborhood.
Just a quick comment. I was at the MAC meeting, or the last MAC meeting, and that was the Full of Beans coffee project where Starbucks was going to come in and take that down and build a new one. And they were also talking about doing, I'm not sure if they said net zero, but close to it, and doing water offsets. And so they were looking into the community of, what they were going to do. So
So
just
they
wanted to share that, yeah.
put it out as a public notice that they would like to find people with old toilets they can swap out?
No, I mean, it could be
I-
any,
I don't know.
well, no, it could be.
I don't mean that,
Right,
you know,
but they were looking
scoffingly
at,
or anything.
maybe like at the Oakview Community Center, or the Oakview Resource Center, or some of the schools in Oakview, which is a different school,
that's Ventura
system.
Schools, yeah.
Right, so it's not, just the one school and the toilets, it could be more than that.
Yeah, there could be other options
Could
there.
even be like at a
I think I
park,
would
it could
allow
be-
allow the creativity to just take its own course. Because if somebody's got the goal of going net zero, they could come up with ideas themselves, and we can consider them.
Yeah, but if the goal is only a goal,
Well,
and,
no, I'm
and there's no consequence to not meeting the goal, then the goal is more meaningless than not.
I agree with that. That's why I think having a net zero policy, not a goal, would be actually a better
Say,
Yeah.
say the city encourages net zero,
No, it sets a policy for it, for new
it
development.
requires net zero.
Yeah, and with the exceptions, if again, we would have the discretion to approve something if it was in the benefit of the whole community. But it would have to, be some special consideration, which I don't know what that would be at this time, but if it's
Me too,
something,
yeah.
if it's something that we want it as a community, and we thought it was beneficial, and it used, more water than typically needed, then we can move ahead on that, we can make a decision on
because
that.
we're not,
Otherwise, we're setting a criteria of a net zero development criteria and a policy that they have to meet, and if they don't meet it, they have to then show reason or cause that they'd have to come before the commission to plead their case and why it would be beneficial to our community to have that development here. That's one thing. I think we're kind of hung up on that one item there, and there's not a lot of development here. So I'm not sure if we're going to get a lot of benefit for
One
that.
could imagine a lot of residential toilets being replaced for an office and retail complex, East Ojai Avenue.
Right.
yeah, but ADUs are gonna possibly be starting to be built, and remodels are,
Well,
continual.
that's yeah,
So
that's,
those can also be, required and conditioned, and policies be made there as well. We're not, I'm certainly not the type of person that likes to have, excessive government controls. That's far from my personality. But I also know that even though we objectively can be speaking about building, we're really talking about a consciousness shift in people's behavior. And to get people to shift behavior and create new habits, sometimes that takes some requirements, not suggestions. And then a new habit's formed, and then it's, oh, that's just the way we do it now.
Yeah,
But
it's
the
interesting looking at
requirements
the-
usher us into that.
I,
So
I, I
interesting
agree with
looking at
that a
it.
requirement in some cases, it's probably not gonna happen.
Yeah. It's interesting looking at Australia and what they've done there. Just over a period of about 10 years, they've really changed their entire water use through the entire population. It's really pretty amazing.
Did they do that through policy, or did they
Yeah.
do it? Yeah.
I mean,
Mhm.
they started requiring 10,000 gallons of rainwater storage in each home.
Right.
And,
So I did make a note of a really practical thing as we were speaking about Casitas Water possibly giving, incentives. You mentioned the $200 back. But I'm wondering, if a municipality like that doesn't want to do that, what are some other options we have? So, there's times of the year when bulk buys on rain barrels can be bought, right? And then we offer the community, rain barrels. So I'm wondering if with creative thinking, if, I'm just gonna, go out there on a limb, the community has said, the city researches, how much X will cost on a bulk buy. Let's just say toilets, or let's say a simple gray water system. And then we take pre-orders from the community, from residents. And there's a due date by the time, that gets cut off. And then the city makes a bulk buy of 3,000 units of a gray water system, and everyone gets, 10 up from cost or something, whatever it might be. And rather than an incentive, we're just using the power of numbers on the buy from a manufacturer.
Or you could get grant funding. I mean, and like, for instance, like the county does that, and anyone who lives in the county, even us here in Ojai, can go down and they have composting bins and the rain barrels. You end up paying for it, but it's at a discounted
And
rate.
it's a discount.
And I'm pretty sure they probably get it through, some kind of waste stream funding
Mhm.
and what have you, or,
Some of us do that through
It's like a
Mountain
grant.
Peoples with food. We do bulk buys, and their truck comes
that
here,
could
and
be a
we all.
city program. Yeah.
Yeah, so it could be, rather than a municipal, we do it by sheer numbers. So that's a thought I have that to me is low-hanging fruit. You call a manufacturer, you see what their numbers are, you do a pre-order with the community, see what the interest level is.
Like Boco did with the air purifiers.
Like Boco did with now that was an urgent need, right?
Right,
And-
exactly.
And what they sell
they
of-
distributed them at their cost. They transferred that wholesale cost to everyone, and you bought one of those units cost $600 if you bought retail, and they were selling it for $325 as a community service. So that really made a difference. There's over, I think, 1,000 of those units in Ojai right now purifying the airs in people's houses. Can you imagine that same thing with, a recirculation pump, a great toilet?
Right.
I mean, these other fixtures
So
that
what would it
could
take
be.
to put that in place?
Yeah,
You know,
It took a benevolent business to just do it.
Mhm.
And that's the other thing, private industry can do these things as well. And that should be encouraged because it's good for that business as well. I mean, look at how much business that they attracted to themselves, how much goodwill
Mhm.
that creates. So yeah.
I think there's a couple perhaps of overriding considerations that we need to get into all of this as well. One is the difference between encouraging and requiring, because requiring means there's a penalty for not complying. And I think we need to tread very carefully there. I am all in favor of saying you need to use the latest technology and minimize water use and all of that. The other thing, though, is a matter strictly for the board and internal city procedures here. A lot of the things that we've been talking about today really fall under Title 24 Building Standards Code. And the charter of the Planning Commission is to deal with land use and zoning issues. It is not to deal with the details of the Building Standards Code or what's required to go inside your house.
Well, I've,
And so I think we need to tread very carefully before we start, without collaborating with the Building Appeals Board, which is also the housing agency, and a couple of other things in this city. You can look it up in Title IX. I think we need to be very careful about preempting the Building Appeals Board's discretion on matters that are building standards. So,
Steve, just, oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
You had a comment.
You're going to say something, Judge?
well, I've heard many times that, especially from Bill Wyrick, he's very opinionated about that kind of thing, that's under the discretion of also the city council can, move. They have mentioned that the planning commission has certain abilities to move in that direction to a degree where it affects a overall development or a development scheme, for instance, because we brought that up before. We talked about gray water systems. And it came back to us that it was still under our preview to recommend that, even though it was a title.
recommend,
Yeah, exactly.
recommend, yes.
So
Requiring
you were
it.
just making a distinction between a requirement and a recommendation.
And a recommendation.
Got it.
Absolutely so,
Okay.
yes. In the same way, I don't think that we would want the BAB to start requiring versus recommending
Got it.
lot coverage or setbacks,
Got it.
because that's
Okay.
our
That's a
swim
great
lane.
distinction.
Yeah.
Here. Commissioner Nolan.
I was just gonna chime in on that also. And I know we brought it up at our last commission meeting and maybe even at some of the other ones. And we actually talked about this at one of our joint meetings with, city council. And I have talked to several members of the BABs. We definitely, and we are making some recommendations that do affect the building code and their, jurisdiction, so to speak. But they were open to us doing it, and at the same time, they're making some recommendations that I see, like for fire, that has to do like with plant lists, which kind of falls under the landscape standards.
Yes, it should.
Which is.
Right,
but
that's
I'm-
land use, what
but-
you put on the land.
Right,
Yeah.
but the good thing about it is, I feel like getting direction or recommendations from both of our groups isn't a problem. I think it's a benefit, because if there's, in other words, we're getting support from each other, and/or we may be missing something, or they may be missing something.
I think the
So-
collaboration would be
It's
wonderful.
the collaboration, that's probably the best word.
Maybe I could say it more plainly or more clearly. I think that when we are talking about something that directly affects building standards, we should be recommending to the Building Appeals Board at the same time that we say something to anyone else, city staff or whoever, but recognize that it is not zoning or land use that we are making a recommendation on. And in the same way, if the Building Appeals Board wanted to do something that was in our swim lane, I would hope they would do the same thing. I am curious about ADUs, though, because we're talking about water use here, we're talking about recirculating systems and all sorts of stuff. I know that the state laws, and there's several now that affect ADUs, have relieved local governments of their ability to regulate certain aspects of ADUs, like whether you can have one, like whether you have to have additional parking, or various other things that might impinge either on our normal discretion or on the BAB's normal discretion. Is submetering one of those things, or is net zero water usage, if you put an ADU in, is that something that is so far still unregulated by the state? Because, I mean, if you're gonna put an ADU in, currently, you're not using any water in your backyard. But if you put a residence in there, you're gonna use some water. So is that something that the city can even regulate?
Well, look at it this way, if you build a new structure in your backyard, that's landscaping that perhaps you're not gonna take care of. And that uses more water than the people who are gonna live there. So you
I don't
could
know.
say that
I don't know
it-
what my
it's a
house
wash.
uses
I also think that if
compared to a
you
comparable
get
piece of
into
lawn.
regulating things with ADU, the state's gonna give you another cleanup bill ultimately,
Uh,
like they just did.
Well, this is why I'm asking, is water usage, and, because I've read the ADU laws, but not lately, is water usage even mentioned? Or is composting toilets or anything else even mentioned in any of the ADU legislation? Do you
Composting
recall?
toilets is not. You know, the water usage, I don't want to say absolutely not, but I think you would have to have something on the books, like recognizing, like if you already had a residential growth control ordinance tied to lack of water, then that might be adequate, because I think it's correct. The state is pushing ADUs to become a ministerial action.
Right.
They do not
They don't want any
any sort of
local
unnecessary
restrictions on ADUs,
right.
basically.
So whether it's design review, whatever, you do have some exceptions. You're allowed to have requirements for them. Most of what I've read in the modified, codes, though, it's trying to go to where the units are essentially tied to the primary unit on the property and is not seen as an intensification. And I think intensification in
It
all
would- yeah.
aspects.
It would be an obvious increase in water usage, though.
Could be, but
There's
what
a
if you had
second
you
residence.
could have a family of 6 living in a house versus one person living in the same house, have the same amount of plumbing fixtures, and 6 people are going to use a heck of a
Oh,
lot more
yeah,
water. So,
If you
I-
determine water usage by counting faucets, yes.
and I think that's more where it's going, is that the accessory dwelling unit is just seen as something that can occur on single-family or multifamily zone properties. And I don't know all of the restrictions, but I don't know that, absent having something already on the books that's focusing on, we're in a drought, therefore we're limiting water use based on this, I think it would be seen as a restriction if you tried to exclude ADUs.
It would be an unallowable restriction by the city, I
And
think.
it
Yeah.
certainly would be in the coming years. I have a feeling that, the legislation, as you said, and it's not even just ADUs anymore. I mean, you're getting things now proposed up to 8-story buildings by right, which is kind of like getting into Houston, Texas territory.
Yeah.
Not that that's getting approved yet, but I don't think that would be, water usage is a big issue nearly throughout California. So I don't think that circumstance would be something you'd want to hang your hat on to try to limit water usage. The city's already, with the second unit compliance program and that, you're already going to free up and encourage second units on properties is how it looks. So obviously more people, you probably will have more water use in some way. At the same time, Ojai's population, I think, has shrunk somewhat in the last
Yes,
couple
it has.
decades.
Yes. Well, at least the counted population. We're
Right.
not sure how many second units out there are populated that
Right.
have people that aren't counted.
Commissioner Corbin, you had a question, comment? For Mr. Conlon?
I always like to do things in a fairly simple way. And I think, there's certain things that we agree on. The theory of a net zero development policy is one of them. Free gray water permits is something else. As far as allocation for water, you always have to go to the larger agency. It's in the purview. What's done in San Diego is the water company gives an allocation to each household. They determine how many people live in that household. They determine what the nature of your landscaping is and what's important to maintain. and you get credits for that. And then they give you an allocation for your water that makes sense. Here, our water company doesn't do anything like that. Our sanitary district, as far as I know, is still charging $17,000 for an ADU,
Well, they've had to stop.
and they don't want to recycle water. So, you know, it needs to get to a larger level. We're talking about puddles as opposed to massive things. We could recommend that people don't have water runoff from their gutters. Maybe they have to get redirected. We could recommend that people rip up grass, that it's no longer allowable to plant that in the city of Ojai. We could, I mean, there's real simple things that we can recommend. And I think that we kind of go down this road that gets so convoluted and hard to understand. So I think that, you know, we need to really look at this in a really simple way. But the large-scale problem is not even what we're talking about. I mean, think about all the farms that are still using outdated modes of irrigation. I mean, those things need to be cut out.
Yeah, and that's not something we have any control over as a city. Yeah. So, Mr. Connolly, we've been discussing this for going on an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. Do you have enough information here?
I have a lot. I'd probably need to look
Yeah.
at the minutes to organize it, but of the many things that were discussed, I don't know if you'd want to go back. A lot of times you referred to as what was the low-hanging fruit, but like sort of itemizing, we feel this would be the best thing to do, most cost-effective, whatever it is, sort of the balance between have the biggest impact and be the most feasible. I think if it hits those two criteria, those are sort of the things, and I don't know, maybe the list, you get 3 things, 5 things, or as you said, short-term, mid-term, long-term. Clearly things that would be tied to getting general plan policies in place, I think those are inherently long-term. They're important, but they're
Leave them
long-term.
alone for now.
Yeah, so I think that would be helpful to me to try to break things down in some kind of structure like that to then forward to the city council.
All right.
And several specific motions might be in order to push things forward.
I don't think a
To the
motion,
city
I think
council.
it's more of a list of
Yeah, still is.
prioritized.
I wonder if we could just
list.
Poll the panel, as it were. Yes, right.
So I want to share an idea, and then I want to pass it to Commissioner Nolan, because I know I've been watching her put her L's and her S's and her M's on her list. So she did that prioritizing that we asked early on. I went to the West Coast Natural Building Conference last weekend, and I was there with a lot of pioneers and very qualified engineers and designers and architectures, and I felt very grateful to be in their presence. And I also filmed the whole thing, so it kept me really attentive to it. And on the way back, I was fortunate enough to carpool up to Cambria for 3 hours and back with 2 of the pioneers in that field, David Eisenberg and Art Ludwig. So I was kind of, sitting at the feet of the masters, if you will, for 6 hours during driving. And David said something to me. He said, "Energy and water is currency." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, if someone puts solar panels and creates all their electricity in-house, then they're not sending money out of the economy of the city to Edison. They have more income that they'll actually boost the economy locally, hopefully." And the same thing with water. If we're recirculating water, using less water, gray water, whatever we're doing water-wise to achieve net zero, then the money is not going to the municipality. Then that family has money to spend in the local economy. I never heard anyone put it that simply and succinct, but it made a lot of sense. So then the question comes up, well, how can we advise the council and give them the specified, list that Councilman Wyrick requested. And involve the residents, the community, as much as we can. Because we've established we're a maintenance community, there's not much development, there's not much remodel, and we don't know how many people are gonna build ADUs. Because that's still a choice, whether the state mandates it or not, we're not gonna force people to build them. So how can we get the community involved? Can we do that by finding the grants or doing bulk buys and offering things at a discount? Can we do that by permit waivers or permit incentives that, hey, you're saving water, we're gonna reward you for that, because we know you're gonna be now possibly spending that saved money in the local economy, and it'll come back here and then come back through business tax or whatever, back to the city coffers. So that's my thinking on this.
Thank you. Commissioner Jagiello?
Well, as a priority, I would like to add, my priority is more on the construction side of it. I would like to create, whether it's borrowing it from another district or whatever, a water-wise fixture list that we can have as a reference and a handout to most people. Do we have that already? Does it include recirculation pumps? Okay, it needs to be updated then. And with water heaters, what does it have on it? It'd be nice to see that. So it might be fairly easy to do. So it's very simple. It's a very simple.
That's a self-certifying. You
Yeah.
sign it to self-certify your meters.
Yeah, and that's when you're doing development. Yeah, so this to me is in more of an informational piece. And the key to it, I think what I would like to see is if we, having that information of the best and most advanced technology in water-saving devices, products, is a good tool for a lot of reasons. And the main reason is that approaching the different districts like Casitas for rebate programs, doing bulk buys like the county does for certain items. These are things that can happen, but they need to have a basis in from a point of view of a list of items that would actually result in a water saving.
I think
program.
there's one simple thing that we could do that costs next to nothing for any given homeowner, and that is to say that as of a certain date, you can no longer run any runoff from your rain gutters into the sewer system.
Okay, that's a policy. That's a policy, right? That's a
It's-
requirement.
It is I would make that a requirement.
But is that
That's
an-
part of keeping the water on the parcel.
Right.
But it also, and of course, you're gonna get some pushback from the sanitary district because they collect based on how many gallons of input to their plant. And if you divert all that rainwater, then they're going to have either more concentrated pollution to deal with, or that'll be one aspect of it, and fewer gallons of water to be treated going into their plant. But I think that as a city, we need to say, you've got to stop feeding the storm sewers with the rainwater from your property, period. And all it requires is that you cut off that downspout and put a little elbow on it so that the water stays on your property instead of going into the storm sewer.
That may or may not happen
Yeah.
in all cases.
So-
Yeah, right.
I agree with you, but are you talking about permitted projects or for everyone in the city?
I'm talking, in that case, I'm talking about everyone.
Right, so that would be kind of, like a mandate, and then how you would have to send out letters to everyone, put on the time limit.
Well, I don't know
Give
who,
them some education.
it's hard to tell who it applies
Yeah,
to,
I
but
think the good thing about that is
No, I
it does start the educational
Yeah.
process.
I'm in agreement, and truthfully, and the data's out there, I don't have it right in front of me, but it's amazing how much, I mean, like, just say for a 1,000-square-foot house, you can collect, in a 1-inch storm, like 600 gallons of water. And I want to say this too, and I don't think I mentioned it early, because this kind of ties in with the LID, or low-impact development. If somebody wants, they can store it in a tank or a cistern above ground or underground if they have the funding.
they do that in
But the
Bermuda.
least
yeah.
expensive way to do it is you store it in the soil. And that's where you start doing like a rain garden, a dimple, a depression, a bioswale, and you add compost and you feed your soil and you create the soil sponge. And that is the most cost-effective and efficient way to get the most water stored. And in addition, if you do have planting, you're going to be able to cut back on your irrigation because the soil's holding the water in.
Yeah, but even if you're not requiring people to build bioswales
No, it's
and
just a
trench drains and all,
method to catch
just
it.
tell them, stop putting the water in the storm sewer.
Right, but I think you need to
That's the simplest,
show them
lowest hanging fruit.
how to do it.
You have to,
Yeah.
you do, you have to show them, one, where the water's gonna go, because a lot of people haven't done analysis or even watched where the water goes. They haven't paid attention on their own property where the water goes. And two, depending on where the rain spout is, it might be running down the driveway or wherever, and it's not being captured.
There may
And-
be a
and
limit
s-
to how much
and-
we can
and so
control.
And so for mandating that, we're also possibly asking them and requiring them to spend money they may not have to create a dimple or a bioswale or buy a rain barrel. It's not just as simple as cut the curve off and capture the water. It's a design system that
Right,
has
but you
to be
could
made.
create, you could have a course or a class, you could supply the educational component, or, let's put it, the handouts are already out there, we don't even have to reinvent that either. But in addition, you possibly could tie in your program where you have the funding and you get the bulk rain barrels. Or maybe there's a discount from a local supplier to get rain tanks or tanks or cisterns or whatever. But you could basically create a program to go with the,
I think an educational program
Yeah.
that goes with all of that would be a fine
Exactly.
thing.
so there's a
But
way to do it.
I'm not suggesting
Yeah,
that we require everyone to put a bioswale on their property or anything else of that sort. Just stop putting rainwater in the storm sewer. That's, what does it cost? $5 for a little rain gutter curve or something like that. In fact, the city could say, okay, we'll rebate you $5 when you do this, but you have to do it.
So, but what you're saying is like have a period of time where there would be some sort of education about this at X date.
Yeah, at X
This will
date,
no longer be we wish you would do this, but we expect you to do this.
that's right. That would.
And focusing on rain gutters, not
Just-
not some more complicated measurement of on-site runoff.
Exactly right. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm with Commissioner Powers on this. I am very definitely not a government overreach kind of guy. But we're talking about something that's very simple, very low-hanging fruit. And in fact, I mean, I go to the sanitary board meetings and they say, we can tell when there's a heavy rain, we get 5 times as much gallonage coming into our plant as when it's dry season. That's hard on them. It's water that they don't need to treat if they could keep it out of their system. And it will all go back into the basin somehow.
Well, okay.
I mean, if we were to put that in a motion and vote now, I would just need to, I'd have to vote no, because I don't think it's complete enough. Because
Okay.
we just don't know where, putting an elbow on, we don't know where that water's gonna go in every individual property.
Something to aspire to, then.
Well, some
Well-
homes probably don't even have downspouts or gutters.
Yeah, it can be,
So-
it's just,
I think you would have to look into, you're gonna be starting with, especially, this isn't new people coming to the city asking for a permit. This is residents as a whole. I think if you wanted to ultimately have that be a requirement, where it would ultimately be like a code enforcement violation if you weren't doing it at a certain point in the future,
Yeah.
you would really wanna phase in
Absolutely.
why you need to
Yeah.
do this and pick a future date, however
Right.
far
Sure.
out, and
Yeah.
saying,
exactly.
this would be something subject.
And you're right, it doesn't
All of our
apply to
residents.
everybody. I don't have any gutters on the house right now because we just got the roof redone. But when I do, they're gonna put the water on the property.
Right.
And all I'm saying is, if you currently have rain gutters and downspouts that feed the storm sewer instead of feeding your property, stop it. That's all I'm proposing.
And another way to look at this too is because you're right, not everybody does have a rain gutter. I mean, really what we're saying is we want people to capture rainwater, we want runoff stormwater, keep it on site for the many good reasons. And everybody's gonna have a different size property, everybody's gonna have some, you know, a different application. But I think another way to pose this would be, if you have the rain gutters, you cut them, but maybe you have hardscape and you can redirect it. In other words, some measure of capturing stormwater. With the rain gutters being one.
We need to be wary of getting too complicated.
Well, I know, keep it simple.
It's part of the slow spread
slow
sink
spread
model.
sink it,
And
right.
if we take that alliteration and do campaign like that, like other cities have done,
Like the one I mentioned earlier.
that fits right into it.
Yeah, and part of the program, the incentive would be, oh, you know, rain barrels at a discount, and/or there's free classes, and there's information on the city website. In other words, make it simple and easy for people, and even the things that you're providing doesn't have to be complicated, but it's a way, I think, to successfully, you know, get the outcome that we'd want, or we're intending.
So maybe just a campaign that
Yeah,
that touts the advantages of doing that and saying at some point in the future, the city will consider requiring you to do this, but right now, the city is recommending that you do this, and it's a really simple thing. It's a really simple and cheap thing, folks.
Well, that, this comes back to just to me, is a recommendation or an educational process of what is our water-wise suggestions, let's say. And it would include fixtures, downspouts, landscape, gray water. To me, that would be the most beneficial thing. If we could put together as a priority, just how to implement a water-wise solution to your property, and list all of these things and come up with a comprehensive handout. We can have that not only put on our website, but we can have it as a resource, a reference that we can then use, and then we can take each one of those items and see if we can make them into policy at some point. But to make them into policy at this point is it's not low-hanging fruit. It's way up there. It's part of the general plan, as Luke said. It's a little bit bigger picture, but having that organized information would be hugely helpful just to promote and educate right now. And I think if we do that as a start, it would give us a foundation to build on.
There's templates for that already.
Yes, there are, exactly.
And
Absolutely.
Yeah. As we
Absolutely.
each individually have some piece of that information, why don't we
Right.
send it to Luke
Right.
and let him compile it into one thing for water-wise suggestions for the population.
And then a question I would have is, as we amass this, because it sounds like education is becoming a big emphasis, and frankly, that makes a lot of sense to me, that happens before you start getting a
Policy,
little
yeah.
tougher
Right.
on it.
Yeah?
Especially when you're not tying this to new development or somebody asking for a permit. It's kind of like, why am I getting hit with new regulation?
Yeah.
Education
I
in
agree.
advance,
I agree.
people have a certain amount of time to get familiar with it. They know it's coming. It's less of a surprise at that point. But maybe we can take this, kind of write up what we've heard tonight. If you want to send me something in writing, you've mentioned several examples, and we can put that together and say, here's what we see as what to emphasize education. These are the pieces of education.
Right.
And then bring it back
These
so
are
you
the
could
best
look at it
practices that the
Right.
city
Right.
recommends you
before it
use.
goes to city council. That way you're essentially blessing what we would put together.
Absolutely, yes.
And you could modify
Sure.
that.
Yeah, and we can work on that as a project, and once we complete that project, we get that to the city council. And again, I think that would be a great achievement. I mean, not only will it be a good handout to educate people, but it'll give us a basis to just build on from there. Then we could take components of it, step by step, and just, work it
Good.
into our policy.
So is that something we can make an agenda item and Kathy bring in some
I think,
things you already have?
I think
that
we
are-
already,
that are-
Luke said he's gonna work on it.
okay.
We're gonna feed him, and he's gonna
Oh,
bring
got it.
back to us
Oh, got it. I
that
got it.
organized outline, you might say, of what that,
Right. I would hope that the next meeting is you're having that to look at.
right,
And
exactly.
reacting to it is, this is good, this needs to
Yeah.
be changed,
An
whatever, and then it's
organized
ready
list
to
of
go.
water-wise recommendations.
Yeah.
Right, right.
That would be great.
Yeah,
So that may be the best way to do it, because I find that, it's a 2-hour discussion, a lot gets thrown around.
right.
Yep.
I can't write that fast.
Right.
And I don't know how much is just thoughts versus recommendations, and that way I think if we take it into, here's what seems to be the things you want to do in the order you want to do them.
Mhm.
And it seems like now the consensus is that the educational piece of it on all of these topics is really where we're headed, with it ultimately phasing into something, eventually getting into policy and regulation.
Great.
However, if I could give a caveat, because one of the concerns I have is that projects come to us for review, and I've seen us want to be able to make something a requirement, but nothing's in place yet. And so something gets approved and it's, 3-4 months, a year ahead of where we see a policy going. And we don't get that much development here, but we're approving things, we're approving projects that could certainly implement what we want to have in policy. So how can we create a faster track on those and identify what those are? And water is a big part of that.
Right, and I think this is the first step. This would be the first step, because if we're all familiar with this outline of these water-wise policies, we can implement them as suggestions right away, ourselves.
Right, as
yeah.
suggestions, but then we
Well,
we
that's the
can't, we
first
can.
step. That's the first step, yes. And
But
then
you
the-
see, you
and-
hear what
but-
I'm saying.
Yes,
that-
and
that-
I'm in agreement, and I'm just saying that this organizes our ability to take each item, and not as a whole because it's overwhelming, but to each item, once it's organized in a fashion that we can select what we can apply to a policy, then we can just deal with that one issue, like rain gutters. We can take on that. After we have the recommendations, after we vetted out the benefits of not,
But you don't think we have enough information and data as to what constitutes a net zero project?
we don't
to
have it
actually-
organized. That's what we don't have. I don't have a booklet that
I
I
have
would like to
something
have.
that I will share,
Right, that would,
and I'll send it on
right.
net zero.
that we should have, that goes through all of our water-wise policies, so we can look up fixtures, for instance, and they're the fixtures. We look up gray water, there it is. So it's organized in a fashion that I believe it will then be able to,
Yeah, we have 2 big projects coming our way, and I'm concerned we don't have things in place that.
but we're not
are-
gonna get a policy put in place between now and then without even going through this exercise, I don't think, myself.
And more importantly, we can't institute a policy anyway.
Yes,
We can recommend
yeah.
that the
Right.
city council institute a
Yeah.
policy, so.
Commissioner Nolan?
Thank you. So along those lines, I know, my list that I had to look at the modified water efficient landscape ordinance and our landscape standards, And so I would be willing to go, and I did already make some notes, but to go through it again and send that to Luke, and I don't know if that's something we could even go over together, and then bring it back to the commission. So that, in effect, would be at least covering the landscape portion of any new projects that are coming in. And it may be minimal, I mean, there's a couple small things that I think could be modified, but that's something.
But as a separate
As a
issue.
separate-
Yeah, no, we're
yeah,
not,
so-
we're not combining the two.
Right, so we're not
Right,
combining
we're
the two.
still talking about
Right.
doing one and then doing this, because that's a policy that could be implemented
Exactly.
now. Yes.
So we already have the, you know, the
Because we've
ordinance,
we've already done a lot of
mandate,
work on
right.
it, yeah.
But this is something where, that potentially when any new project comes in and a landscape plan is triggered, then, you know, if there are some things that we can tighten up, it would be potentially closer to being in place.
So that would be like the second priority in this priority list.
Right, so I
Yeah.
could do it essentially
Yeah.
kind of at the same
Yeah.
time too, because I already started it.
That would be fine. It
Yeah, it
sounds like,
seems
so you would
easy
take a
enough.
component of this and go into a greater level of
Yes,
detail as a
yes.
Yeah.
follow-up.
Which we've already done a lot of
Yeah.
work on already. And
Exactly.
So that's the one area we've worked
And
on
that's why I
that we
brought
could
it up.
now go to policy on, because we've done so much work
Right.
on it. Kathy's done so
That's
much
all right.
work on it.
But I have,
Yeah.
but I'm willing to say that I'm volunteering
Yeah.
if everybody was in agreement, and that would help at least one.
One aspect of
arena.
the whole picture to
Right.
go into more of a
Mhm.
policy
We
mode.
know that
Yeah.
50% to 70% of the water on a residential lot is used in the landscape. So if we could tighten that up a little bit.
Then I'm
Okay.
concerned with commercial parking lots, specifically a parking lot that was, you know, being looked at, being built on the.
That's
No,
an
I know it
example.
hasn't come back
No,
yet,
I know.
but,
No, no,
but,
you're
but,
right.
but, you know, I think we're all in agreement, we want permeable surfaces and
Yeah.
somehow to
Huh.
sink the water, but right now, if they came before us and wanted to just do asphalt, we could suggest them do permeable surface, but they wouldn't have to, they could just
But they
pave
were also
paradise.
suggesting not to do an asphalt hard surface. They were just
Mhm.
wanting a gravel.
Well, that's because they're nice people,
permeable.
but,
Yeah,
Yeah, but I'm just sharing that,
Yeah.
yeah.
right.
So, Mr. Connolly, I love the idea of all of us sending stuff to you, and you could compile it together into an informational kind of packet that we could make it available to the public, and we could then use that as a basis for going ahead with whatever regulations we think are needed.
I think it's a good idea because you've got a lot in the staff report, and sitting through this on 2 meetings we're just trying to distill this
Mhm.
and rank this, because the majority of this was received as good ideas anyway, but it's a sort of, okay, what do we do next? And I think that's been the frustration of people wanting to act on it. So I think if we try to take the information we have, especially you give me things in writing and then put that down on paper and say, okay, here's what came out of the 2 meetings. It gives you something to react to again, and at the end of that meeting, we should have something to forward to council.
And it sounds like a lot of the information is already out there. We just
Yeah.
have to,
It has to be
Finally.
identified and fed to Luke, yeah.
all right. I'm going to say we're done discussing this topic.
Okay.
We do still have, I want to compliment Luke and the staff on organizing the topics here, but we have not covered all the topics.
What did we miss?
We have leak detection, offset programs, and recycled water that no one has taken the kind of deep dive that Commissioner Nolan has on gray water and landscaping.
I'm hoping that we can
Yeah, I think he has enough information.
provide
It's in
information.
there,
Yeah.
and it will fall under that category of a product or a
We can
a
recommend and
recommendation.
encourage at this
Right,
point.
exactly,
you
that
know?
it's somewhere out there, and we can identify it to be on the list when we get it back from Luke, and say, okay, well, there it is, and then we can discuss it in more detail once we get some kind of recommendation.
Yes. Thank you. I'm going to move on to future agenda items. Item 4. We actually have a future agenda item, which I'm really excited about.
Ooh, a DRP.
And I noticed one of the items is selecting a new chair, and that really excites me. So,
It's fast.
Are we coming back with this list on May 16th, or? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go
No, that's
back to
good.
the
Yeah,
previous
no, that's-
item, but we need to close it out with
Sure.
some kind of a, how do we know when we're done?
Let's pick the 16th, because that will give you time to get me information, and then I've got to prepare that. And I also think on May 16th, we'll be looking at the tiny homes discussion again.
Ooh, that's a big one.
So
Do we want to?
I don't know if we can do both, but that's,
Well, we can start.
That's
Yeah.
true. It's not time.
that's sort of on the tentative agenda, needs to get back.
Okay, great.
Okay.
And they're tied together, though. It's the ADU thing, it's,
Mhm.
there's some,
Thanks, Chet. And then we have Planning Commission reports and comments.
I'd like to just say one thing about the
You can
future agenda items.
Certainly say something about it.
My term is up May the 22nd, and I think Kathy and my term is up as planning commissioners. I've reapplied. I don't know if I'll be accepted, but I just, because I'm probably not, who knows what really they think of me. But anyway, Kathy is deciding what she's going to do as well, but that's something for you to know, that there may be two of us not here after the 22nd.
That'd be interesting. And
We'll be to a bare quorum if there's no
Yeah.
reappointment.
we have one
Right.
missing
Uh,
commissioner as
so-
well.
The city, somebody has to, do something about it.
Well, let us
uh,
hope that the city council and its wisdom
Is aware of those dates.
can
Okay.
reappoint everybody.
Move out smartly, as they
Right.
say.
Thank you for bringing that
Okay?
up. Commissioner Jagiela, do you want to report on the city council meeting?
Sure, I was not there.
Okay,
And if you want to get information on it, you can watch it on YouTube.
it's on YouTube. Thank you.
May I step back for a moment?
Yes, you
Sure.
may. Seems to be the fashion this evening.
Well, because the discussion items and agendas items
Yeah.
went by really fast. I think affordable housing needs to be really looked at, and I'm still, experiencing, lots of conversation of displaced people since the fire and the lack of housing. It goes beyond ADUs. It goes, it's beyond just building an ADU. It's making, the meme now, affordability by design, which is soft costs as well as hard costs. And that's a conversation that I would really like to expedite.
Can we include that with our tiny homes discussion, or is that too much for one evening?
I think maybe as a separate item. I think the
Yeah.
tiny homes is kind of specific to that
There's some
discussion.
overlap there, but not enough.
Right.
It sort of overlaps, and Commissioner Nolan's pointing this out, it sort of overlaps with the emergency housing issues, but it's also affordable housing.
Yeah.
Those two are somewhat overlapping in subject matter.
Several items there that all seem to overlap.
They do. There's about 4 of them that overlap. The accessory dwelling, emergency housing, tiny homes, and affordable housing, they could all be looked
Yeah,
at.
because
yeah.
we've looked at some hard costs, but we haven't looked at,
Right.
really haven't looked at the soft costs involved and how all that can be massaged to really make something affordable, and zoning for larger parcels to create cluster housing and all of that, like really affordable by design.
Again, we need to be careful that we're suggesting how people build their homes.
We're suggesting how people build their homes. We're suggesting different approaches and design models that they could choose from. And then in terms of the soft costs of permitting costs and things like that, that's something the city can look at.
Yes, I agree completely on that, yes. The soft costs, definitely.
Just, there seems to be a cluster of issues that all are sort of
So
related.
I'd like to have that on the agendas sooner than later and on this list.
Okay,
Move it farther up the list.
perhaps June 6th would be a good time for that.
Can I just ask, when you say affordable housing, being sort of a planner and somebody who worked in redevelopment, I think of that as are we talking sort of deed-restricted, subsidized housing, or are we talking affordable housing as in bale construction, other types of things that are affordable by design, smaller size, higher density, or sort of all of those things?
I think there's a lot of overlap. That's the problem, because there's not a lot of development here. So the ADU, for instance, is probably
It's
our
gonna be
biggest
most of our
development.
development.
Is our biggest development. you know,
Well, and
issue.
let me give you an example that I experienced over the weekend at the Natural Building Conference. So there's a young woman there. I'm blanking on her name. She's 40. She's now the mayor of Moab, Utah. Prior to that, and still ongoing, she created a nonprofit called Rebuilding Community. She's building straw bale homes, and has built quite a few already, using volunteer work crews, but, an experienced designer and architect and plasterer. But the labor force are volunteer that want to learn how to build straw bale, and she's building them for $70 a square foot, and has built quite a few already. To me, that's affordable by design. So there's a real life, real time example, and she said, "You want templates? You want how we got these things permitted? I'll send you whatever you want."
So I think the answer to Luke's question is twofold. I think there's affordable by design, and then there's affordable with a capital A by, a subsidized housing. I think we have to have both discussions here, because we don't have a lot of development area, and we can't make people build ADUs. And yet we
Right.
still need to deal with the affordable housing issue, which may be best dealt with in a more of a subsidized housing type of conversation. So that's my opinion, is that
Yeah.
I think the ADU conversation is affordable by design. And that's a kind of a separate conversation. This, to me, is a more official subsidized housing type affordable housing conversation, which we need to have, because we have the other conversation happening. And we have other agenda items to bring that issue up, the ADUs, the tiny homes, all that kind of brings those questions up. But I think the community is somewhat wanting to hear more about a subsidized housing solution, because ultimately, that's how you can control rents. Otherwise,
Yeah,
you're
but
affordable by design.
I agree with you.
So I'm saying it's both.
It
It's
is both.
both. But
With
to me,
subsidized housings, we'll end up with less units. So subsidized housing is, there's a finite amount of land to build those on.
right,
The ADUs, anyone can build an ADU.
right. That's why they're
So the
we
net,
can't mandate them to do it.
we can't
Yeah.
mandate them,
And
but
to even keep
potentially,
rent
there's a
down.
lot more units than what we'll be able to build as a subsidy.
We can encourage and make it easier.
Right, and by adding units, you may in effect,
You may,
your more units,
Yeah.
you may affect affordability overall by doing that. But that's the only reason I asked, is when I see affordable, I'm thinking
Yes.
more
well,
very low, moderate income, locked
right,
in.
exactly.
That
That
type of
results
housing.
in specific numbers
Yeah,
for
it's
this,
controllable
this
because
area
For the rainy
code.
numbers to meet.
Or
meet
this
those
zip code,
obligations.
yeah.
Yeah, and our general plan and our housing element.
And it has to do with mortgage costs or rental costs, and how you control that
Right.
is.
Right. Versus like, I know with the tiny homes, I understand why people could argue it's affordable by design, but I don't have a guarantee. It may not be all that affordable. So,
It may be affordable, it may be low cost to build, but there's still market rate rents here.
Right.
So-
that's all I mean when we say affordable.
Well, that's why we need to have the other conversation.
Yeah.
We need to
Yes,
have
it's
that.
really-
So I'm wondering that on May 2nd, we have this 110 Fox Street on the agenda. How long is that really going to take? And we have the selection of a new chair. Can we start engaging in one of these affordable housing conversations on May 2nd?
That would be a staff question.
I direct that to Luke.
Probably matters how detailed of a staff report you want, or if you want it as a discussion item, and how
I'd
many.
be open to a discussion item.
As a discussion item, and if you're picking a facet of affordable housing, then it's probably doable. Like if it's a different construction methods that could resort in affordable units, fine.
So lobby the chair, he and the director determine what's on the agenda.
I lob it to the chair.
I think we may need a little bit more time, though, especially if you're talking about suggestions for different types of construction. I'd like to have more time to do some research, because I have a few ideas in that regard too, and it's not enough time for me to be prepared for a conversation like that. But it's a very good conversation, but I don't know if May 2nd is for myself. I mean, we can just bat it around, but to get any kind of substance in it, I have some other ideas too. There's some modular housing that I want to introduce into that conversation as well, because that's very affordable to build, right? I think we're going to have that conversation on the tiny homes. I think when that comes up, that's going to trigger a lot of these types of conversations. So I'm wondering if we just let the tiny homes come first, and kind of, that'll kind of bring up a lot of these kind of, I think, alternative options. And then we go from there and not make it a one, you know.
Well, are we?
'Cause I don't know if we have a specific.
Is this tiny homes discussion item, tiny home on wheels, that's strictly a wood build?
It's sanctioned by the city council to review the
But
ordinance.
it's a tiny home
yes.
on wheels? built
Correct.
for-
Yes.
So to me, that's a very limited conversation that doesn't really overlap into what we're speaking about.
Yeah, that is a very specific, looking
okay, I would
to
agree with
recommend
that.
on those.
Mhm. I just still don't know, I mean, we can have the conversation, I don't know what the focus of the conversation would be at this point.
You have to be very
I mean, I
careful
would-
with that expanding much, because the current draft
I want to have the
language
conversation, I
is,
just want to know
yeah,
what it is and what we need to bring to that conversation.
yeah.
Are we, to prepare for that.
And the suggested language is already set out potentially as a subset of the chapter on ADUs,
You mean the tiny home thing?
the tiny
Yeah,
home
I'm
thing.
not
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about
yeah.
that, now. I'm
And-
talking about
No,
Ray's
but in
suggestion.
terms of alternative materials, I mean, I can do research on, what cities have already permitted other types of building, what that looks like, in the discussion, give an overview of where my interest lies and what's possibility and what's been done, what policies have been
Okay,
created.
and I would want to know, like, with what goal in mind, and I would like to narrow that down to a very.
Well, the goal is to implement it in the city, implement these things in the
Right,
city.
and that's a big goal, that's a big goal,
Isn't this
yeah.
more like a building code, methods and materials thing, which
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
maybe from us is a recommendation,
Right.
we don't get into a lot of detail.
Or couch it in terms of, we recognize that this is a Title IX issue, but here's the commission's thoughts on this topic.
Right, and then it goes to the building appeals board
Yeah.
to flush it out.
And, or do you want to do a presentation on the straw bale houses? I mean, that could be a very focused
Well, I filmed the
presentation.
entire conference in every session,
Right.
and I do plan to hold some community screenings. I
Right.
have permission to do some community screenings
Okay.
on some of the various sessions that address these.
Well, I think you can make a request to do a presentation on straw bale homes as a building method for ADUs in Ojai. That'd be a very specific thing, and you can, ask to see if you can make that presentation, and we can all agree on that, and then we can have that specific discussion about
Stream it
that.
and record it.
Yeah. And I'm okay with that.
And how long is a presentation?
Well, that's
normally?
up to everybody to decide.
10 minutes would be good? No.
Build that thing back.
No, we can, you can do, we can project stuff up here on the screen if you want to do
Mhm.
something. But May 2nd sounds a little tight for that, if you have to edit all that stuff down.
But I'd be very open to hearing, having
Yeah.
that presentation, having you make that
Well,
presentation.
is there,
Interesting to hear about it.
given how thin May 2nd looks, is there another discussion item we'd like to have on May 2nd that we can actually have? My concern is how much we have. Like, maybe it was Randy that said you had 2 or 3 weeks off, like there was nothing to talk about, and there's lots to talk about. So,
Well, I think the key to me in talking is having specific goals in our conversation.
Right.
Otherwise,
mhm.
it's just
No,
wasted energy for
yeah,
me.
No,
But
naturally. So
I would
I'm-
like to, if that's why I like to zero in on a very specific goal that we would have, and then sure, we can add that if we have clarity on that. I don't know if we have clarity on what to do you know, on those other items at this point before staff has the opportunity to organize a report. But I would be open to your presentation, if you could pull it
Yeah.
together by May 2nd.
If we pull together by Thursday for delivery of
Yeah.
Next Thursday.
That's 2 weeks plus, right?
Yeah,
tomorrow.
A
Oh,
week
that's-
from tomorrow,
yeah.
Oh,
a
okay.
week
Yeah,
before.
that's
yeah.
right. Okay, it's already the 18th.
Well, let me review what I have at home, and if.
You
there's
could talk to
not-
John,
If
you
there's
know,
not
on this, yeah.
objectives, then, any objections, then I'll.
I
Hear about it.
request.
I have no objections. I would love to hear it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it'd be fantastic.
So let me review all the archives I have and material to see if I can edit it down, because there's
Okay.
a lot.
It could probably, we
Look,
could
I have a
spend at
question.
least half an hour on it.
The city owns certain parcels of land, is that correct?
Yes.
There are some, yeah.
And is it possible to get a listing of where they are and sizes and? so
We have
can-
that already.
We do have that.
And we've been there.
Yeah, I mean, like, there are the parcels that are identified, like in the housing element, for instance,
Yeah, the housing
that
element
belong,
has a lot
that are
of
owned by the
detail about
city.
what's available.
You have to look at it and see if we haven't been overtaken by events on particular parcels, and something has now been built there since the general plan was done, but that
The
data
housing
should be
element
there.
gets updated every 5 years, so it has a map in the back there that shows which parcels are available. Not only city-owned parcels, but there's a zoning overlay that allows affordable housing, high density in the downtown
Yeah.
area. So that's all in that housing element.
Right.
All right. I was unable to go to the Building Appeals Board meeting, but Commissioner Quillisi went in my stead. Can you give us
And a wonderful stead it was.
yeah,
This was an enlightening and an active meeting. This is the Building Appeals Board meeting of April 11th, a week ago. The major topic was fire. They talked about the fire hazard map, fire-resistant construction, and then a little bit on revisions to the City Building Appeals Board ordinance, which is one chapter of Title IX. There was a presentation by a gentleman who works for a company called ANCO on improved screens to keep out embers in attics, crawl spaces, and other places like that. We have new vents that we've put on our roof when we had our roof redone, and these vents have screens on the backside so that embers that may land on the roof, and it's a Class A roof, even if they get in, they'll be stopped by the screen so they don't land on all the stuff that's in the attic that's more flammable. But in addition, they talked about the screens that need to be behind vents that are on crawl spaces. You walk around houses and got these little louvered vents down close to the ground. And also, if you have a raised deck on the side of your house, then you should be worried about an ember shower putting embers in under a flammable deck. So all of these things, and of course, ANCO sells everything that you need for this. But it's interesting to see what the state of the technology is for keeping embers out. And frankly, it's for lack of an ember shower that we managed, along with obviously the fire lines that the first responders set up around the town, that we didn't lose any houses in the city of Ojai. And so it's an important new thing. But there are still a lot of chimneys, for example, around the city that don't have screens and such on the top to keep embers from wood fires in a house from spreading to the neighborhood. The topic of insurance rates came up because the staff report said if we depart from the CAL FIRE hazard map, which says up along the north side of the town right up next to the foothills and along the south side of the town, right next to the foothills and the brush, is high fire hazard severity, whatever the order of the words is there. And the rest of the town was low. That in fact, we would all, I think, recognize is not the case. In particular, an ember shower hits everybody. But Bob Daddy, who's a member of the BAB and is a local insurance agent, said that gradations in fire hazard severity, in fact, do not affect insurance rates. And so we shouldn't take that straw man as a reason.
They do or they do not?
They do not.
They do not.
They do not affect insurance rates. And let me see, they are, two members of the BAB, Mr. Daddy and Mr. Ulrich, and community members who wish to join them will be working on drafting a city fire hazard map and return that for consideration at the May BAB meeting. And then there were a lot of other things. Do we require re-roofing to Class A depending on the amount of damage to a roof? For example, right now, if you have a Class C roof, you have a wood shake roof, and a tree falls on it and destroys 40% of the roof, under the current code, you can rebuild with shakes. And the question that came up was, at what threshold do we set to say, when you have this much damage, the city code should say you need to re-roof with Class A? And in fact, this is another one of those insurance company things. The insurance company will pay for actual damage, and they will pay for what is called a code compliance upgrade to your roof. And only if the city requires it, that's right. But if the city requires it, the insurance company pays for the whole thing. And in the long run, it makes a more fire-safe city. Let's put it that way. There was a great deal of discussion about appeals, which the BAB has only had 2 of so far in its existence. But right now, if there is an appeal of the city building official, the appellant has 10 days to appeal. And then the city has 45 days to respond to the appeal. And there's a large amount of money involved as well. I think it's $500 that it costs you to appeal. And so the BAB said, let's at least, and if the appellant does not appeal within that 10-day period, then they waive all rights to appeal. The city, however, if it takes more than 45 days to respond to the appeal, there is no consequence. And so the BAB is recommending that at least we level the playing field. Let's reduce the amount of money that you have to put up to do an appeal, and let's say that whatever period of time, and I think they settled on 15 business days, whatever period of time the appellant has to appeal a decision, the city has the same amount of time to respond to it. That seemed to be pretty popular point of view. They also talked about stopping gutters from connecting to sewers, and they talked about other things that are really fire-safe kind of things, like acrylic skylights be banned for new construction. That's just a flash fire waiting to happen on new construction and remodeling, and requiring installation of smoke detectors. Right now, the state law says you have to have a smoke detector in every bedroom and every hallway in a house when you're remodeling. But you're not required to put a smoke detector in the garage or the kitchen. And in fact, insurance company statistics say most house fires start either in the kitchen or the garage. And so the BAB is going to recommend that those things be, if you want to call it, restrictions over and above the state law. So, end of report, sir.
Thank you very much.
Your dinner sets your smoke alarm off all the time.
I know. Most of it.
I've done that on a number of occasions, but I'd rather have a false alarm than a fire.
Given they've only had 2 appeals, maybe they should be called something else other than the Building Appeals Board.
Well, actually, if you read the portion of Title IX that institutes the Building Appeals Board, it is also the housing agency, it is also the building agency, or something like that. There are 2 or 3 or 4 different state mandated functions of some form, of some portion of city government, and they've all been assigned to the Building Appeals Board. And it is only in the narrow Building Appeals Board job jar where their decisions cannot be appealed to the city council. Everything else they may decide can be. So it's only appeals to city building official decisions where the Building Appeals Board is the final decision maker, and that's in the state law.
Thanks, Chester. So Kathleen, I think I'm gonna, in the interest of time, I'll just say Commissioner Nolan and I attended the climate change seminar in Pasadena that was entitled Just Say We, because it was about the Paris Climate Accords.
Oh.
And it was very interesting. Mr. Haney, thank you for persisting through our extensive discussion.
At first, I'll be honest with you, I wasn't sure you guys were gonna reach some conclusion. I was
You just never know.
thinking we spent 3 hours talking with no direction, but you came through, and Luke has his marching orders, so good luck. I had just a couple comments. I tried putting numbers on them so that I had some priorities to my thoughts. But I'll just ramble, that's what I'm good at. You know, I was at the VCOG, Ventura County Governments Association meeting, and they were talking about affordable housing, and they had 4 cities come in and speak to us about it. And they were talking about what a great job they were doing on meeting some RENA numbers through it, but more importantly, providing low-income housing for their communities. Part of the discussion was that they were mandating that some of these new developments, and Thousand Oaks is developing, Moore Park's developing, Simi Valley's developing, you know, they have the land to do that. So when they're talking about developing 400 homes or 500 or 1,000, and they're saying that they're gonna give 10% to affordable housing, and you start doing the math on that, you say, that's really not a lot of housing. And so I was the only one who commented on it, that I believe the cities have the responsibility to dictate more affordability in their housing. And almost everyone, the other 9 cities all looked at me like I was crazy, like, well, how do you expect us to develop if we put those types of demands? But the reality is that's what you have to do. You have to create the demand as a city and say to the developer, this is what our needs are, and 10% is not good enough. But that's about what it worked out to, was 10%. So it's really not a lot when you really think about it. So I was looking at that into some of the things that you guys were talking about tonight. And, you know, especially, Ray, when you really talked about affordability and the different levels of affordability. And Chester, I agree with you wholeheartedly about the 2 different types. One is the building costs, and then one are just housing costs in general. I think there's another discussion that has to be held, and that's looking at the entire community and what the community can provide as far as affordability, because we're limited. And right now, we're choosing ADUs or the state of California is using ADUs as your affordability. And I don't, you know, again, there's someone said here, you can't make anyone develop. There isn't anything in the city charter that says that I can tell any one of you to build an ADU. So unless it's a part of the function that I want to create in my own backyard, it's just not going to get created. And then you look at, if I do create it, I want to recover those costs. and there is a housing number. So it's a big discussion. So if you're gonna take it, I'd set it aside and choose it as a standalone and go after it. But I think trying to fit it in it would be very difficult. As far as housing, construction materials, again, I might think that you would make a suggestion that you take that to BAB and give all your information to them and let them look at the criteria for building, because I believe that's in their purview. You can say what you want to develop on a land, but you can't say what you're going to develop the land with. So I think that's where BAB has to be a participant. And I think we've talked more than once here about doing some joint committees. And again, it's someone said it earlier, we talk about a lot of things, then a lot of other things we talk about, and we forget about the things that we talked about until we bring them back up as the new idea. My suggestion is that you guys create an ad hoc committee, get 2 members of BAB, and start doing some of this work that we need to do for our community. I think it'd be a good thing. I wanted to talk about Steve, your idea about just cutting downspouts off and letting water flow. All of us, well, most of us land planners or land users know that your property is, you drain your property usually in most instances in a U-shaped. And you've got to keep the water that's on your property, but you funnel it usually in a U-shape to the front yard, which in turn takes it to the street, which in turn takes it to the sanitation district, okay? That's just the old philosophy on land planning. A lot of the cities that I work in, I know that Kathy works in, first of all, you can't do that anymore. You're catching all of your water, you're taking it usually 15 to 20 feet from your sidewalk or your curb, and you're actually putting your outlet right there in your lawn or in your planter bed, and you're allowing it to percolate. And when you reach field capacity or the inability for water to go downward, then it's gonna run to the surface. But they're hoping that at least you get a percolation factor. So that's already occurring in most cities. We could do the same thing. In fact, I don't see in any city that I work in anymore that they're even allowing curb coring. So you can't take water to the street. They're just not allowing it. So again, that's something that we could do. Someone has, I think it was Pat McPherson who said this a lot. He said, don't write a law that you can't enforce. So if you're gonna make a mandate about cutting, downspouts off, you just have to remember how you're gonna enforce it. And Luke will tell you, the enforceability of a lot of this stuff, and you guys know this in our community, is just, it's almost nil. So then what you end up doing is you create laws, and then you gotta come back and say, let's prioritize how we're gonna enforce it. And then some will get the high-end STRs are one of them, and rain gutters being cut off at the ground might get none of it. So it's just interesting when we think about that, is if we're gonna create something, actually, how can we manage it? And then, Ray, that also goes back to your idea, which I thought was a great idea about bulk buying, if you have the ability. The reality is we're a small resourced city. So for someone to assign that to someone in planning or in public works or something like that, I don't know if we have the manpower to do that. But what we do have is the Green Coalition. And so we're heading into the budget season. So a recommendation coming from planning saying, let's allocate some funding to the Green Coalition to do specific tasks would be a good thing. And that's a great recommendation coming from planning, and that's how I would do it. That way, again, we're not burdening staff with additional work, but we are accomplishing things that we feel are good for the community. Dark skies. What else did Green Coalition do? Remember, we gave them a $10,000 grant for dark skies. We gave them. We've just done a lot of things with them. So I think they're the perfect choice for that. So you might, excuse me, you might think that one through. I like the idea that someone said, finally recognized we're a maintenance community. We're not a development community. We're built out. We are building. I'm not gonna say we're not, but I was talking to Luke today and the fact that, look at your schedule. How many DRs do you have before you? Not a lot.
The open space we have is in the commercial district.
Right, and that's about it. But we are a remodeling community, The interesting thing that I see is, as I drive around the community, is how many placards I don't see on people's houses where I see a lot of remodeling going on. So how do we get those people to buy into the system, that, to have inspections, to do the right things? You know, I think that's a big discussion to have too, is how can we reach out and help people do the right things versus, you know, creating environments where people want to do the wrong things. So I think that's important. I think I had something on your last discussion. Fire severity. I agree with Bob Daddy that the insurance rates, because he would know it better than I do, probably wouldn't increase if we created an all-in-one for the city regarding a high fire zone. The problem is, and Chester will attest to this, is insurance may not go up, but building costs will surely go up. I can just tell you that. I can tell you that from experience. They go up tremendously if you have to use fire retardant lumber, or if you have to encase eaves, or you have to go to lath and plaster versus, you know, versus wood. There's just a lot of things that incur when you create that. So in this balance that they're gonna look at, I sure hope that they look at costs versus insurance costs versus, before they say we're all gonna be one and all, you know. So I think that was important to touch on. And then, I think that was it. Unless you guys have any, well, I have a lot of things, but I'm not gonna get into them. Unless you guys had something that you guys wanted to ask me.
Do we have
Green
any-
Coalition, resource management, bulk purchases, allocating funding to the Green Coalition. Oh, I thought this was one of the first things I wrote, but I put it down as a 7 instead of a 1. And that was, we have flushing meters attached to our houses so that we know how many flushes we're doing on a daily basis. I thought that was based on what you guys were talking about. And then I thought too, this is interesting, you know, we've all talked about how housing was at one time. You know, 750 square feet and 1,000 square feet was a lot, and 1,200 became huge. And now 2,400 is probably the standard. You know, and then you think about how many bathrooms you have in a house and how many you don't use and how many fixtures you have. And it was funny, I went, so maybe we don't limit it to how many flushes you have in a day. Maybe we'll limit it to how many fixtures you're allowed in the house. But there's lots of, like I said, I put that as my 7. I just thought that was something to talk about. All right, guys, I'm wasting your time. It's 9 o'clock. Let's go home.
Good idea. Any questions for Mr. Haney?
That's it. So if you guys have nothing for me, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
John, I saw you having dinner the other night. It was great to see you around
It's
town.
fun to see you guys.
And that's what's nice about a community our size. We all get to see each other. And thank you for being chair and leading this group. And the next person, enjoy it.
It's been a great privilege being the chair. That concludes our meeting. Well, Ray has a final parting word.
Just an invitation. Earth Day 2018 is this Saturday, April 21st, 11 to 5 at Libby Park. It's the first time it's being held in Libby Park. Lots of different presenters and performers on the gazebo stage covering topics of community energy, microplastics in the ocean, regenerative agriculture, affordable housing, and on and on and on. There's a creativity corner for kids with all sorts of different activities, including cob Legos by Ray Serino. He calls them Raygos, and kids can actually build these things, and they're made out of cob, and all sorts of booths. Kathy will be there with Complete Streets. So I just invite you all to come.
All right. And with that, our meeting is concluded.